Good afternoon, morning, or even potentially evening. This is episode 33 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, a Warhammer 40,000 podcast which, as regular listeners will already understand, is made, developed, and even or produced by a group of individuals who collectively go by the name of Lookout Sir. Individuals such as myself, Dan, and most notably of all, individuals such as Phil. How you doing, Phil?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thanks.
There you go. You certainly sound like you're doing very well, Phil. That was not by any way or means one of the more drab responses to my intro that I've heard from you in recent times.
No, right. Well, you've got to keep. I'm in a shed that is around and outside. It's 5 degrees, so I'm pretty awake. Is what I'm saying. It's pretty nippy outside.
People do not understand the suffering that you endure for your art.
Well, exactly.
This is it, you see. No one quite understands the pain that Phil has to suffer. I mean, Phil, unfortunately, films, or rather records, his contribution to the podcast within a shed that, due to noise issues, he has to turn the heating off. So during these winter months, it's less than pleasant, wouldn't you say, Phil?
I know. Well, I occasionally will do it at home in the house. But then sometimes, other people don't like the fact that I talk quite loudly when I'm recording a podcast and people want to sleep. So, yeah, I'm basically banished to the hobby shed, which makes sense because it means I can do a bit of work on my projects while I'm at it. You're
exercised like a demon and sent, packing to the outside world.
Exactly that.
That's it, man. That's it. Although on the plus side, it's Christmas, or pretty much is. The Christmas ads have started, haven't they?
Yes, it was basically as soon as Guy Fawkes Night was finished, and in the UK, or non-UK members, that's like a special UK-only holiday. As soon as that was finished, it's like Christmas time now. So we're being blasted by all sorts.
A holiday without the holiday, though, It's not like we get any time off for the old Guy Fawkes Night.
No, that's true.
We just celebrate the ritual burning of an effigy. It's quite a profound and or terrifying thing, wouldn't you say?
Especially if you're Catholic.
Well, indeed. But on the topic of profound and terrifying things, I can only be referring to the beautiful Joe. How's it going, Joe?
It's all right. It's terrifying, slightly odd. Although, does this mean that you're going to try and burn an effigy of me now?
Well, no, because in a way, Joe, I always sort of feel like when people make, the guys, the penny for the guy, again, just to fill in those of you who don't listen from the UK, over here, one of the things that we do in order to celebrate the downfall and or, death of an individual who decided to attempt to blow up the Houses of Parliament is that we get children, usually associated with the Cub Scouts or the Beavers, as they're called at the lower levels, not to be confused with, But no, look, I mean, we get kids, and they build effigies of a bearded man and then throw him on a fire, and then we kind of gather around and gawk and vote for which of these effigies is most accurately depicting the evil man who tried to topple democracy. And in many ways, they often look quite a lot like Joe, I'd say.
Yeah, I just don't have one of those weird kind of ye olde pointy hats with the buckle thing on it. But I can always.
Literally the only differentiating feature between you and Guy Fawkes is the lack of a buckled hat.
Yeah.
Well, you do look like you're stuffed with straw on a regular basis.
Sort of unevenly as well, like where they they get big chunks of it in the wrong places. Is that what you're saying, Phil?
Yeah, like a bag of custard, basically, is what we're saying here.
With a few rocks in it in the odd place here and there.
Oh.
Did your so you went to a Guy Fawkes ritual burning the other night, didn't you, on the 5th? And you took your daughter with you. Did she, at any point, feel concerned that they were burning things that looked quite like her father?
I didn't actually take my daughter with us in the end. Because,
did you not?
Because it was a school night. And it's one of those, as some parents will know, sometimes you just don't want your children around, and you just want to go off and do adult things.
Such as going to a predominantly kids event in Bonfire Night.
Well, the thing is, it was in the countryside, so it was mainly ruddy-faced country people getting tipsy on mulled wine. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. Although the fire did get a little bit leery, and even when we're like 20, 30 meters away from it, and it was huge. It was as high as some of the trees, so it's got to be a 30 meter tall fire. But it was just raining bits of flaming ash on us. It was like end of days, and people were just like, because everyone's out in their like waterproof coats and stuff to keep warm. It was great because these things aren't flame retardant, and people's coats are just melting all over the place. And there's a woman in front of me, and some landed in her hair, and from her perspective, just a strange hairy man started ruffling around in her bonnet, trying to put out flames that she doesn't know was there. So I'm just a freak who's just shuffling her hair around.
Who looks like Guy Fawkes minus the buckle hat.
Yeah,
this is it. You see,
her almost border collie-esque hair was Parliament, and I was trying to destroy it. Yeah.
There you go. I'm looking forward to going to a bonfire night at some point this weekend, though. So when this episode goes out, there will still be bonfire nights available for all to indulge in.
Because shops still sell the explosives for people just to buy and set off willy-nilly.
Do you think that would be a potential future angle for us? Maybe we could put together like a Lookout Sir 40k fireworks display for bonfire night?
That would be cool, but we'd all have to be dressed up as redcoats, and that would finish it off, I reckon. Just firing off, but there'd be no like safety aspect at all. I feel if we did it.
No, I don't think so. My brother Gabe, his birthday is in and around bonfire night, and we used to ceremoniously enjoy his birthday by giving him a birthday bash where we would do our own fireworks display, and inevitably, as foolish people, we would, kick over the fireworks before they were about to go off and then miraculously, accidentally shoot one at the neighbour's house. That was quite a moment.
You're a quite bunch of thugs, your lot.
We can be when we get together. I mean, obviously I was nothing but apologetic because actually it was nothing to do with me. I wasn't the moron that, kicked it over. But then seemingly I was the only one who was willing to take the blame for it. So I ended up having to debate with a rather large man.
Was it one of those situations where the neighbour opened the door, you were the one person that didn't scatter like a bunch of cats, and you just stood on your top in the middle of the garden with everyone laughing at you?
Basically, exactly what happened, yeah. So all the guilty people had run away because obviously their guilt compelled them to do so. And there was me kind of trying to defend their antics when I obviously had no leg to stand on. And to be fair, again, to emphasise, the man who is the neighbour of my parents' home is a gigantic fella. I mean, he's very, very big.
They're growing big in the country, as I've discovered.
They do, but not
big.
Not in my case, but nonetheless, yeah, that was a whole episode. But I'm quite a gifted negotiator and/or speaker, so I did calm him down and apologise profusely, and all was forgiven. But not like Guy Fawkes. He got thrown on a fire, didn't he? Poor old Guy Fawkes. Anyway, nonetheless, this podcast has nothing to do with Guy Fawkes, although you wouldn't know it after what seems like 5 minutes of. I mean, I thought, quite good material, but most likely the sort of content that people who are in the YouTube comments will be telling me is god-awful. But nonetheless, look, I mean, this is episode 33, not much of a milestone in the grand scheme of things, but if you feel compelled to tell your friends and hopefully expand the reach that Lookout Sir 40k enjoys, that would be wonderful, because at the end of the day, we are committed to continuing to produce, develop, and or deliver one of the finest examples of Warhammer 40,000 podcastum in the known universe. Or maybe that's a little bit of an over-exaggeration of our ability, though, I don't know, it seems relatively accurate to me. I mean, what do you reckon, Phil? Do you think we're the best podcast in the known universe when it concerns Warhammer 40,000? Breathing.
Do you know what? I don't know. I mean, we're definitely not the most popular, but we're a pretty damn good one. And most people may well say we're the best in the UK. Some people have said that to me. I mean, that's a quote from someone somewhere.
There you go. Have we been given approval to attribute that quote to a real life person?
No.
Oh.
Could we put that on a poster, like at the cinema? Like, rated best podcast by the Times.
I guess.
I mean, it's entirely possible that we could do that, although we haven't been rated best podcast by the Times. But should the Times ever extend to covering or rating podcasts related exclusively to Warhammer 40,000 and or associated products, then potentially we could, wind up in the number one hotspot. Who could say?
Like, number one best rated Warhammer podcast by my mum.
I don't think my mum actually likes this podcast. I will say that much. I think if she listened to this, she would be confused and frustrated by how she had raised her son to become such a dweeb. Because my mum's pretty cool, she's always out clubbing and having a groovy disco time. The idea of her son being a fat Warhammer nerd, it was never a part of her plan. She never wanted this for me.
Every time I talk to your mum, she complains to me that you talk to me more than you talk to her. So
honestly, if my mum played Warhammer 40,000, I'd talk to her all the time. But she doesn't, so she's dead to me. She's not dead to me. I love my mum dearly. Let's not be unreasonable here. But at the same time, she is right. I do talk to you way more than I talk to her. But I mean, only recently. I mean, if you include the fullness of time, I'm sure I've conversed with my mother way more than I've talked to you or talked to you.
Yeah, she had you in the early years.
Exactly. God. I only met you when I was 30, maybe 28, 29. How long have we been friends now? Like 7, 8 years. 2013, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I was 29. So there you go. We've been buddies for almost 7 years, mate.
Yeah, it's been more like an outreach program for you, though. I feel it's the poor and the mentally handicapped.
Me and Phil have often said that. We do often feel like we've found ourselves lumbered with you in a sort of community outreach project. Although to be fair, as much as I give to you, Joe, I get much more back in return. I mean, the overwhelming sense of well-being I get when I talk to you and realise how awful everything is in your world, it just fills me with a great sense of glee.
I'm like some kind of weird, a therapy punch bag. That's what I am to you.
That's it, mate. That's it. No, God, no. I mean, Phil has definitely said that before, but I'm only joking.
Yeah. So Phil invites me over for dinner, and he's like, "Oh, we've invited over that Joe. It's going to be interesting tonight. Let's have a good laugh, drink some wine."
I tell you what, though, if you do ever get invited over Phil's for dinner, his missus does make an amazing lemon drizzle cake. That thing is rather delicious.
It is good. What was the pudding that we had? It was rather delicious, and me and you ate lots of it, Phil. We drank wine.
Do you know what? I can't remember.
He's spoiled, you see. He's getting this all the time. He doesn't know anymore.
No, there's just too many choices.
Craziness.
Kept man.
He is, mate. Exactly. He's done all right for himself there. Anyway, look, we've digressed massively. Let's try and explain what's going to go on in this podcast. So, despite our best efforts, I'll be honest with you, from the outset, we didn't think it would go quite as tournament heavy as it has, but one of the segments is us talking for about an hour and a half about the changes to the Grand Tournament, because anyone who's been listening to us on a regular basis knows we like Warhammer World Events, and we especially like the Grand Tournament. They've tweaked a bunch of rules, they've changed a bunch of stuff. There's a bit of controversy around certain things. Mainly, we're frustrated that we couldn't buy tickets for the event, although that seems to be correcting itself as time goes on. I was told the other day that I'm number 3 on their waiting list, so by all accounts, me and Rich shouldn't be able to go along and attend. I don't know, Joe, did you get on their waiting list?
I didn't know how to get on it, so no.
Fine. Well, there we go. Well, hopefully, if I make it through on the waiting list, they'll let me buy 2 tickets and we'll sort it out. But nonetheless,
what you're saying is you need to beat 3 people up.
I mean, I don't
to make sure they can't attend.
I don't think I've got it in me anymore to beat anyone up, mate. My bones are made of glass and the outer casing is mostly jelly. It doesn't work. It doesn't. if I threw a punch at someone, I swear to God, my knuckles would just fly out of my hand in a really kind of pathetic kind of fashion, and then just kind of mush up on their face. I'm more likely to break my hand on someone's face than I am to break the face that I was aiming towards. That's how pathetic I've become.
Oh dear.
I don't know if that's factually accurate. I don't endorse violence, although I do enjoy watching a bit of UFC here and there. But, you know, that's...
What about a good old-fashioned slap across the face with the leather glove?
Oh, what, like those Russian slapping contests?
Yeah, or like you're like officiating a duel.
It's true. Well, if you officiating a duel doesn't involve the glove slap, that's when you're participating, and that would then imply that I was about to duel someone to the death. My cardio at the moment will be useless. I don't think I could go 30 seconds in a saber fight. That would not work.
Maybe a Warhammer duel.
Well, in a way, Joe, we've been kind of engaged in a Warhammer duel, haven't we, lately? We did that Elder versus Drakari thing that we said ended in a draw because I cheated. And then we did the one last week where it turns out you cheated. So we've got 2 draws under our belt so far because of foul play.
Yeah, the try-hard Olympics has begun.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we do things before, like, going out into the big wide world and cheating there instead.
Exactly. We're just trying to work out exactly how much we can cheat, and then we're taking that out into the wider stratosphere. But anyway, look, despite our best efforts, this wasn't intended to go quite as tournament heavy as it did, but we talked for about an hour and a half about the Grand Tournament changes, and then, as it turns out, we just talked for about an hour and a half about building a list. The idea initially was that we were going to talk about this 1K Space Marine project we have and the kind of narrative-themed ideas, and then also relay that to some tournament stuff, but for it more to be a 50-50 mix. But what ended up happening is that we ended up just talking about building tournament lists for about an hour. The opening, 20 minutes, we kind of kept it a little bit narrative, but yeah, it just sort of derailed and took on a life of its own, much to our collective disappointment, although mostly Phil, I'd say. But at the same time, that wasn't our intent, but nonetheless, that's what we've done. So hopefully you enjoy that. If you don't, please let us know, and we'll do nothing about it, because it's done now, and you're listening to it. So, but we'll take it on board for future references, I suppose, if nothing else.
In the future, we'll do how to write a fun competitive list.
No, just fun list. I mean, the thing is, writing a fun list is really easy to explain. Take what you want, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just make sure it's legal.
And then you just take Iron Hands.
Yeah. He's running them as Ultramarines now, isn't he?
Oh, that's all right then.
So he's running them as Ultramarines because he wants to use the Warlord trait where Cullen does mortal wounds on 6s.
Yeah.
I was like, go on, Rich. Quality work.
We could do a section on how to and how not to write a thematic fun list for taking to a group campaign day.
I tell you what, though, his list is super cool, and it's very themed. It's full of special characters. It's very much a Red Scorpions list from start to finish. There's no doubt that that's what it is, because it's got all their special characters. It's not his fault their special characters are ridiculously strong. He just happens to have ended up with a list that's full of them.
Oh, just accidentally. It happened.
Yeah, exactly. The money fell out of his wallet. He had no control over the situation. Before he knew it, he had a whole collection of them.
Like a strange tumbleweed effect.
Exactly. There you go. But anyway, look, I reckon that's enough of the talking about it. If you'd like to listen to us talk about the changes to the Grand Tournament, timestamp's going to be below. If you'd like to listen to us talking about building lists and how we go about doing that and the methodology that we're approaching the Grand Tournament finals with, then you can also check the timestamp for that below as well. But with that said, let's transition now to the opening segment. We hope you enjoy episode 33 of the Lookout Serve 40k podcast. Tell your friends, like and subscribe. Yeah! Woo! Welcome back, everybody. In this part of the podcast, we're going to be talking about the Grand Tournament. People who've listened to the podcast throughout the course of time, I think we're at about 1.5 years now. It's always mad and weird to remember, but nonetheless, people who've listened a lot will know that we'd like to talk about Warhammer 40,000's Warhammer World's Grand Tournament. And to talk to me about the evolution of the Grand Tournament and all the other kind of accompanying features are obviously good buddy Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hello.
We've also got Joe.
Hello.
And randomly, here's Rich.
Hello.
Yay!
There you go. A little bit of a delay there for Rich, but nonetheless, he's here. How you doing, Rich? Going well?
I'm doing all right. I couldn't find the unmute button quick enough.
It's all right, bro. It's all good. So, for those of you who don't really care much about Warhammer World's grand tournament format, obviously this probably isn't the ideal segment for you, but thank you for enduring all the same. On the 1st of November 2019, Games Workshop surprised us all by announcing that grand tournament with no heat or other kind of, distinguishing features would be taking place on the 1st and 2nd of February, which is roughly, it's not even a month, I think it's like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, not even that, after the grand tournament final of the 2019 season has concluded. So, yeah, on the 1st and 2nd of February, there will be the first of 3 grand tournament events that will take place at Warhammer World. We assume throughout 2019, or rather 2020, sorry. But we don't know for sure because the information is quite vague. But what isn't vague is the lovely new rules pack they released that clarifies some new changes, which we want to talk through. But first and foremost, were you surprised, guys, that they announced this thing and then it was on sale as soon as it was announced and then sold out crazy quick? I mean, that was fun, wasn't it?
But it blows my mind a little bit because with all the other stuff, they've kind of announced in advance that the sales will be going on sale on this date to kind of give everyone an equal chance to buy these tickets. Whereas in this instance, it was a case of, now they're live! Whoever's paying attention at this exact second will get the tickets. And it's just a bit weird.
I mean, there is a chance that it's not sold out, because Phil spotted this. But on the page, it says they're sold out and you can join the wait list. But if you read the details of the event, it says Heat 4, 40 KGT.
I'm pretty sure that's a typo and that it actually is sold out. But yeah, because they had that similar typo with the Heat that we went to, where they just hadn't updated it from the previous one, and obviously Heat 4 was the last one. So yeah, it is sold out and there's a wait list.
Yeah.
But it basically means that you basically had to get on it really quick if you wanted those tickets, because we were still busy just eyeing up the event pack, going, oh look, they've changed the mission format and the points and stuff, and then we didn't even clock that the tickets were on sale at that point.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy because we were talking about it and then someone was like, oh wait, hang on, they're on sale, and then I think Richie was the one who pointed out, well, they're not anymore, and it's like, oh good, there's that one done. Crazy.
Well, I was going to buy us all a ticket, and I was like, oh wait, no, can't do that.
Can't do that. That door is closed. I mean, credit due to Games Workshop and Warhammer World Events, because I mean, this will be another 120 person event. So to have sold through 120 tickets in a few hours with absolutely no prior PR or messaging is quite incredible.
It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon as well, wasn't it? So it's not like it was like prime time traffic for their website.
Still, though, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, there's a couple of reasons why I think this is a good move and a couple of reasons why I found it frustrating. I found it frustrating, first and foremost, because I didn't get a ticket, although I am on the waiting list, and obviously any of our listeners out there who want to be nice and have me come along, by all means, help me out. But nonetheless, the point I was sort of getting at was, I think one of the big problems for Grand Tournament Heats 1, 2 and 3 in the course of 2019, and 4, which we'll discover in a week or two, is that the top kind of competing players have been pretty consistently the same people. In fact, I think a gentleman by the name of Simon Pridis, I want to say his name is, has seemingly won, I think he's won 2 out of the 3, with James McKenzie having won one other. So, but in all instances, very similar people are, floating towards the top of these events. So do you think this change of not selling all the tickets at once is maybe an attempt for them to create a situation where people who qualify to get through to the final aren't then necessarily allowed to come back and compete in later heats? Or do you think that's not the case and you'll still find the same people turning up to every event?
Well, it's the first come, first served basis. So if these people get in there when they go up for sale, there's nothing stopping them. So the people who qualify, so the top 5 people that qualify at this tournament, if their tickets go up afterwards, they can quite as easily just buy those tickets, unless at the end of the event they go, "You've qualified for this. Do not buy a ticket for the next one." Which seems like the fairest option.
I think it will come down to when they put, because if this is the first grand tournament, which we can come on to the renaming thing they've done in a bit. But if they put the next round's tickets are only available to buy after this event is finished, then that would suggest that is what they're trying to do. Because as with this year's one, they all went on sale at once. So basically, you could, if you were inclined to definitely try and qualify, you'd buy one ticket for every single event on that day. And this way, at least it would appear that, in theory, on the 3rd of February, the next heat will go on sale. Because in theory, then, if you've already qualified, there is less incentive for you to definitely buy another one. If people might want to people might be wanting to chase the meta and go to all the tournaments just to keep testing out their list, which would be a bit annoying because then it doesn't actually help the people who want to try and go to different tournaments to try and try it out, give it a go. But hopefully that's what they're trying to do.
The other thing you got to think about is that the people that have tried to do it, will they then get they then get a chance to buy those tickets as well. So yeah, they get to try again to try and qualify, but then they're taking tickets away from people who haven't had a chance to even go. Unless Games Workshop put in a one and done kind of opportunity. So you've had a go at trying to qualify, you failed, let someone else have a go.
What do you reckon, Phil?
I mean, it's hard to say what their intention is purely because it's so vague at this time. I'd like to think people that qualify for this heat won't then be buying tickets for the others because, I think it's only fair that if you've had a shot, you shouldn't, and you've qualified. I mean, the number of people that are qualifying, though, is drastically lower than before. It used to be top 35 or around about that. Now it's top 5. So there's going to be a lot more people still from that first one that didn't qualify that will still want to go to another event. Is it fair that, you can go to all 4 heats and fail to qualify versus someone that hasn't been to any and can't get a ticket because they just weren't on the website at the same time? I do like the method of them announcing when a ticket is coming on sale, a bit like a festival. So at 8 o'clock, on a Friday or Monday or whenever it is, we know that we can be there to attempt to get the tickets. I think just announcing it and saying, "Oh yeah, the tickets are up," is a bit of a shoddy way of doing it. It's a bit unfair because also obviously people need to plan, their budgets. Some people can't afford a ticket at a drop of a hat because they're not super cheap, and you've got to then go, "Oh, am I even free then?" We'd probably spend a couple of days just chatting about which event we want to go to or which one we're going to plan to go to. So logistically, if you're going as a group, it just coming up straight away doesn't necessarily give you much time to decide, unless you do a Richard and be like, right, I'm just booking tickets for everyone. Because worst case scenario, you can just get them refunded.
Yeah, and that didn't work because they'd already sold out.
Yeah.
I think,
which I just find the mild conspiracy theorist in me is surprised that they sold out that quickly despite no prior warning or anything.
Well, I think these events are super popular and they've got a lot of reputation. A lot of pretty much all the YouTubers or anyone sort of known within the community or the hobby go to these events within the UK. I'm pretty sure some people come from outside of the UK as well. So I think they are super popular. So I'm not surprised it has sold out at the drop of a hat.
I think this one as well adds an extra element because the fact now that they're essentially stating that the finals event is no longer just the GT final, it's the Grand Masters event, which is quite a grandiose title, as obviously the name suggests. And I think obviously, and again, I don't know this for certain, but my assertion would be that based on the format that they're going to be running the final in, that the final will not require you to pay to attend, which I think would be a really interesting change. And I imagine, and again, this is me just really kind of crossing my fingers and hoping a little bit, that if you're one of the 16 individuals who qualifies for this finals event, that you will probably be treated to quite a spectacular, tournament event / opportunity to, meet with people from the studio and talk to the rules guys and all this kind of other bells and whistles stuff that you imagine they might throw your way for, being part of the elite.
I mean, that seems likely, because if you think about it, if there's only 5 people qualifying from each event and there's 4 events, that's 20 people. That's like a really small.
There's not
tournament.
even. There's only 3 events, so there's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's 5 qualifiers from each event, and then there's this one extra qualifier, which I'm going to assume is the overall winner from this season. So I think,
yes, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case.
Yeah, so whoever wins the Grand Tournament final in January will potentially, and again, this is all hypothetical, I think it probably will be this way, will qualify for the this Masters series, as it's called, which is, and again, to clarify for those who haven't been to the Grand Tournament finals, the Grand Tournament finals, in my opinion, is always the most disappointing conclusion to the Grand Tournament format, because there's a lot of gravitas and a lot of sort of general kind of oomph behind the whole thing. But when you actually go to the finals, you've got discouraged players who feel that they squeezed through and they don't necessarily feel that it's relevant for them to attend. I think they struggle with selling tickets, and I think the thing is as well is because of the fact that so many of the top 35 players are made out of the same people on repeat, they end up in a situation where they really struggle with generating good levels of attendance for the finals. I've been to 2 Grand Tournament finals. The 2 Grand Tournament finals there have been, I've been to both. The one at Warhammer Fest was really poorly attended, and believe it or not, the one at Warhammer World was even worse. And I think that was, something that they're probably seeing in ticket sales for the finals right now. And admittedly, some of those people will be people like Joe, who wants to go but hasn't bought his ticket yet because money. I mean, that's about right, isn't it, Joe?
It's one of those things like, hey, I've qualified. I now need to find another 65 quid for this ticket, and then another 80 quid, 90 quid for hotels and then travel and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a weird kind of thing, because I've qualified, I've achieved what I set out to do, and then I'm kind of backhanded, oh no, this is going to cost me even more money now.
Yeah, here's a bunch of extra costs. And I think that's the thing. Yeah. I think if it is that the Grand Tournament results in a finals event where everyone attending is given free entry, I think that's going to be really exciting for the players that are taking part, because I'd like to think that this would start to elevate and become something a little bit above and beyond what the Grand Tournament final is, because in my wildest dreams of what the Grand Tournament final was going to be, it's never really felt that way. I think you've got a lot of players who are very tense and very, aggravated by being in the final situation. It's also a grueling weekend because it's 6 games, which is always a tough ask. And the Sunday for the Grand Tournament's final is like the worst thing, because you're either in contention to win, you could be in contention to win or get a top 3 or top 10 finish, in which case you're trying really, really hard, or you've fallen so far from that opportunity you just don't care. So the attendance in day 2 is miserable at the Grand Tournament finals because people just give up. Where the day 1 attendance is not. I think at the Grand Tournament finals last year, or rather earlier this year, I think we had 70 players. Sound about right? 75, 80 players?
Yeah, I think it was around the 70 mark.
Yeah, and then, in day 2, I'd swear 15, 20 of them went home. And then the Warhammer Fest one I can't even remember. But the point is that I think having a 16-player knockout format, which is what this Masters event is going to be, is really interesting, because it means that theoretically, hang on, let me just do a bit of mental arithmetic. 16 players become 8 players, 8 players become 4 players, 4 players become 2 players. So you'd have to play 4 games of 40k in one day. but I guess you'd have to spread that out over a weekend, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how they schedule the whole thing, but the point is a knockout tournament is a much easier thing to, orchestrate and deliver. I suppose the only complexity of that would be if they did it over 2 days, you'd have to then pay for a hotel to stay over, unless...
I wouldn't be too surprised if they do it over the 2 days, but like the Saturday you're getting treated and you're going out for dinner with a bunch of the rules team or whoever, and because it's such a low number of people, you can get a really tailored service where you're treated and sort of get the VIP experience, and then that makes winning to qualifying to that event super special, regardless of whether you win or not.
Yeah. But
because it will just be a great experience.
Do that? Because this is the thing. I love the idea of that, but do you think they actually will do that?
I mean, who knows?
I actually think that it could potentially be a Warhammer Fest thing.
Oh God!
Because the final.
It couldn't be. The timing would be all wrong though, because Warhammer Fest is like June, July, isn't it?
April, May time.
Yeah, and then they've got to do 3 heats before that. They won't. I think it's going to be a yearly thing, and they've finally caught up. So 2020, you start off the tournament, it ends around Christmas time or whenever, or prior to the next chapter approved, like the 2021 next year. So your season is for the duration of the chapter approved book, because that's the new missions that you'll be playing. It sort of makes sense. And we were saying it sort of this time last year, it makes sense to coincide it with that. And it's only up until now where they finally sort of rotated the heats and finals around to that alignment. So I think that's what we're seeing.
I mean, I really like the idea of, as someone who's never going to get to the finals, especially due to my previous performance and how difficult it is to get tickets now. As a viewer, though, I love the idea of there being a knockout of all the best players that they've been. That sounds really cool. I can't. That sounds, and as they can, because they're credit to the Games Workshop community team. Their Twitch streams are really cool. Following them, so I really like the idea that they found over the course of the year the 15 best players from that year, the reigning champion, and chuck them into a knockout tournament of games. In theory, that should be amazing.
Yeah, and they're live streaming it all. That'll be something people really want to watch as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm genuinely really excited for it. I think, I'd love to be one of those 16 players. I think I'm going to work hard to see it to try and make it happen, but. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting test of gaming prowess and skill and so on. And I swear, man, finishing 6th is going to feel so unnecessarily bitter at one of these events. It turns into one of those, isn't it, where you're like, oh man, 6th place.
No! You've got to think that as well. Like those, six people can potentially all have 5 wins at a GT tournament. So then that could potentially, that 6th man could be knocked out basically on secondaries kind of thing, which would be even worse. You'd be like, I missed out by 1 Slay the Warlord or 1 Line Breaker.
Well, we've had a look at the event pack, and that's not how the tiebreakers work anymore.
Well, it's true. No? We should probably talk through the events pack actually and kind of do the whole spiel, because this is a really interesting document for Warhammer World and their events, because prior to this, to give you a sense of context, there were no teeth to the Grand Tournament event packs. It was very in keeping with more of the casual Warhammer tournament structure that had been used in the past, whereas this is a much more, authoritarian document in terms of things that you need to be mindful of and things that they're trying to do to police the game. So, to be clear, the date of the first of these grand tournaments will be the 1st and 2nd of February 2020. They will be using, obviously, Warhammer 40,000 match play. Your army size is 2,000 points. So that's 250 points more than it was previously. So that's way more in line with the, I hate to use the term established, but it is established ITC format. If any of you aren't familiar with ITC, please check out our friends. They're not really our friends. We don't know them at all. But, you know, you can't necessarily use other language to describe them. The good people of Frontline Gaming, they run the ITC. If you don't know what that is already, go have a look at Frontline Gaming. They'll tell you. But essentially, 2,000 points is in keeping with the tournament standard to, ITC set things. Board size is 6x4 foot, which is obviously standard. Scenarios, they'll be using Eternal War missions from Chapter Approved 2019 edition. So if you wanted confirmation that Chapter Approved 2019 edition is going to be a real thing, it's here in the Grand Tournament rules. You'll be playing 5 games. You need to have a Battlefield army with a maximum of 3 detachments. All the usual nonsense appears there. Interestingly, they've specified that you need to be able to speak English, understand spoken English, and have all your documents, including army lists, codexes, FAQs, erratas, White Dwarf supplements, everything you have on your person needs to be in English. So you can't turn up with your French codex and be expected to participate. You need to have English language literature, which is interesting. I mean, what do you reckon of that, Joe?
I feel like someone's tried to pull a fast one on them somewhere and be like, well, I speak, I don't know, Italian, and I can't, and I can read this, but you can't.
I mean, that was a very interesting choice of languages there, Joe. I feel like you're trying to impress an elephant
French,
in the room.
I'm going continental.
Oh, I see.
Or like German or whatever. So
I think it's very important though that we all have the out of date versions of our English codexes as opposed to the out of date version of a French codex.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those weird ones. Like it's one of those like you need to respect my language. You say, yeah, but I can't read your language, kind of thing. Whereas English is the
language of 40k. That's what it is now. Yeah.
It makes perfect sense for like an international event. If you're trying to draw people in from other countries, there'd be a generic language that you will speak. It's the same rules at No Retreat in Gibraltar. They get people all around the world, and it's like English is the main language. Yeah, there's a bunch of Spanish people that tend to speak Spanish to themselves if they're just having a casual chit chat, but you're kind of expected to all speak English as a generic form of kind of being able to communicate with your opponent. It sort of makes sense that they've just kind of, what they've done is they've just gone through every single tiny bit of detail in terms of what you expect from a tournament, and they've just written it down. Whereas a lot of it before was just a bit, not flaky is the right word, but a bit vague, or it's done on it's just a fun game. You're meant to here to have fun. Yeah. This time it's like definitive rules, definitive penalties for breaking those rules, which is what you want from a super competitive tournament, and that's what this is geared to be. Which isn't for everyone, but it's good if that's what you're after.
What happens if 2 French people end up playing each other?
I'm sure no one would complain if they're speaking French.
Could you imagine the guy that tries to pull that, like they're at the top table? Sorry, mate. They're speaking in French to each other. Out! Get out of here! Anyway, obviously that's not going to be the case.
So per the rules pack, it just says you have to be able to converse in English.
All right,
it doesn't say that you have to converse in English.
I have to admit, I did read that to double check it, but I still thought it would be funny to make that point, regardless of the fact that I knew it was wrong. Anyway,
how do we feel about the lunch being provided on both days?
I mean, that's quite handy. I mean, you know,
I say that as someone who was, well, at least the last time we went, lunch on day 2 was a little disappointing. Just for members of the Warhammer World team who might be listening.
Yeah, exactly.
It's because their kitchen was being refurbished. So normally, day 1 is like pie, fish and chips, burger and chips, pizza, chips, salad is an option.
Solid.
It goes. Yeah. And then there's like your generic school lunch cake, which is like a sponge cake or a fairy cake kind of thing with optional custard. For day 2, Sunday roast. We English. That's what we deserve. That's what we want. But this time round, it was hot dogs again because their kitchen was closed, and words were said, grumbles were had,
It wasn't as bad as the Grand Tournament finals in 2018 at Warhammer Fest, where lunch wasn't provided, but it clearly stated it on the event pack. So I famously, well, not famously because no one really knew I did it, but I did grumble to them. I was like, well, hang on a second here. It says here you provide lunch, and you're telling me you don't provide lunch. So I got, if you got a £15 refund on your Grand Tournament finals ticket, and we're wondering where that came from, it's because I grumbled.
Well, it wasn't just because you grumbled to them. It's like you casually went around, mentioned it to a bunch of other people, and were like, I think you should go up and speak to them about it. And after 2 or 3 people did, he was like, oh, yeah, we're looking into that.
Yeah. That's the
thing. What you say is you started a coup.
I did.
Actually.
I did. I started the little whispers that then turned into, that was democracy. Oh, flipping heck, I can't speak. Democracy in action.
I wasn't there, but I don't think it's necessarily a coup to make it when you paid good English pounds for a described service to get said described service.
It's true. I agree. I'm with you, Rich, and that's why I didn't stand for it. I wasn't going to have it. Anyway,
to be fair to the good folk of Warhammer World, they did do a good job of having to feed us, even though the kitchen wasn't working that day.
Yeah, exactly. Credit where credit's due to them. They did all right, which is as much as we can ask. In terms of model requirements, there is a new document called Model Requirements Guide that is very, very thorough, and actually, again, as per what we were talking about before, there are now things in place that will enforce these rules. So previously, if there were elements that didn't abide by the broad kind of like painting, modelling criteria, say for example someone was running a character that was close enough but not quite right, so I don't know, you're running like an Eversaw assassin as a, I don't know, Vindicare assassin or something mental. Not that anyone went to that sort of extreme, but well, not that that's necessarily an extreme, but the point is like,
it's pronounced Vindicari.
Sorry, so Vindicari assassin.
Yeah.
You've been listening to
Is it really? I've never heard it.
It is. And do you know how I know this?
He's been on the Black Library novels.
I was on the Black Library stuff in preparation for that segment we didn't do. And I listened to the Agents of the Imperium book, which is really good. I very much enjoyed it. I do like the audiobooks that Black Library put out. But yeah, there's one about a Vindicari assassin, and I had to rewind that section a whole bunch of times to realise I've been saying it wrong all this time. In fact, so like you at home.
I think everyone has. I think we've all called it Vindicare or Vindicar assassin.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it doesn't have that weird little floaty thing above the, I don't know, any of the letters.
I'll just try. I'll find a clip in the background so I can play it in a sec.
All right, well, there you go. But yeah, look, the model requirement thing is really interesting, and we'll get into how they're going to start enforcing this. But there are actual kind of points deductions that can occur to you if you don't abide by these rules. Additionally, as well, within their updated model requirements, and this will be very pressing to many of us, I feel, if you paint this thing as, say, a celestial lion, it needs to be a celestial lion. Equally, though, I was using Sam Ham models as Eltok at the last event, so I'm as much to blame as anyone else for those sort of scenarios.
I'd have to use the chapter tactics rules. I couldn't just use them as Imperial Fist. This is what we're saying.
No, absolutely not. So that as a legitimate successor chapter, you couldn't take an Imperial Fist character and add him to your force because, again, they've specifically ruled if you've painted it as an Ultramarine, it's an Ultramarine. If you've painted it as anything else, it's whatever it is. If it is something, if it is nothing, then it's all fair game. Now, if you're a really unlucky person who settled on what they thought was a generic colour scheme that turned out to be a well-known successor, then that's probably quite unfortunate. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is one of the rules that I really don't entirely agree with, but at the same time, they've taken it that way, and I'm going to let them have it because at the end of the day,
it's one of those, they want it to be played by the rules that they have written and by the rules as intended as well.
Yeah.
So everyone's going to take Red Scorpions then.
I mean,
Yeah.
well, that's the thing though. But if you take Red Scorpions, then obviously you can take the Red Scorpion characters, but you can't then put something else in. It's one of those.
You can run as any. But what I mean by that is you can run it. It's a chapter which has got some special characters. But if you take Red Scorpions, you can play them as whatever you want at any tournament.
Yeah.
Using the successor rules, as long as you don't care about using any specific special characters, you can get access to all the rule set.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got Imperial Fists, it's like you're taking Imperial Fists. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
It definitely encourages, or it basically penalises you for taking a known chapter, and you're much better. And we've had this discussion loads on the podcast. You're always much better off making your own chapter up, because even with Red Scorpions, it's like yes, you get access to those special characters, but you are sort of running the risk that one day Forge World or Games Workshop will be like, here's some chapter tactics for our known chapter, which could happen because they've obviously done
that's a bold claim that Games Workshop is suddenly going to give some rules to Forge World.
I mean, it seems unlikely anytime soon, but that could still happen though. You never know. Whereas if you create your own ones, prancing ponies, never going to happen.
Basically, for anyone thinking of getting into competitive 40k, paint your army grey and put a question mark where chapter symbols or Craft World symbols would normally be, and just there you go. But again, I mean, if you're doing it Harlequins, I believe there is actually a Harlequin mask that has the question mark, so maybe not them. And yeah. I think they also might be grey.
Or just take Ultramarines. Apparently, they're the best round right now. Isn't that right, Joe?
No, not Ultramarines, mate.
No,
Salamanders.
Was it Salamanders?
Yeah.
God, I'm so behind on the meta.
Mate, Salamanders.
It's been a whole week.
I know, mate. Salamanders are mad.
They're the deleters. They just walk around, just atomizing units.
Yeah.
Like.
In terms of army list creation, though, as well. So again, we'll get to the sort of patey stuff when we talk about it in the pros and cons of things. But yeah, it's a 2,000 point army, and to be clear, you have to specify what units are in your army and what they're equipped with. You have to specify what reinforcement points you have allocated, and in some instances what they're allocated to. You have to specify the army faction. Unit keywords is also something you have to specify in your army roster. So when you're supplying your army list to Games Workshop, you have to include unit keywords now. You have to call out your warlord, the names of all the detachments, the specialist detachments, if any. So if you were thinking of using siege breakers for Imperial Fists, you have to have specified that on your list. You can't just make it up when you arrive. You have to specify all relics, psychic powers, pre-game stratagems, so that's new. So no longer turning up to the table going, what you got? Oh, our Exalted Court with this. You have to specify your Exalted Court and the associated relics or warlord traits with it. Anything else that is done pre-game, which is what I was sort of talking about for there, and you have to specify the amount of command points you had before and after pre-game stratagems. So if you had 12 command points and you spent 4, you have to write 12 command points minus 4, 8 command points left. So real amounts of detail required now in your army list. There's no more room for list tailoring when you arrive at the table.
This is huge. My question for this is: will this be enforced? Because I've kind of noticed that, like, in the past, GW will take your army list because you have to supply one when you go there. They all kind of get put into a pile, and then they go and, I'm assuming, just get thrown into a shredder. At no point does anyone sit there and go through to check to see if these armies are legal in any way.
I doubt they would do that for people entering in, but if you're one of those 5 people that qualify, I wouldn't be too surprised if they go through those with like a fine-tooth comb to make sure you're not disqualified. Or at the very least, maybe they post them up and they're tied in more with Warhammer Community site, because that's what they used to do with the winners. Maybe they do that now with all the 5 that qualify, because that's quite a small number. And they also do that on the Twitch stream. So the last heat, they went through, I think it was like the top 5 or maybe top 10 lists, not in like a fine-tooth comb detail, but they did go through generally what the armies were and what some of the more interesting ones were. So, this could well just be feeding into what the Twitch streamer guys are going to be doing. It's like a follow-up.
I mean,
I think it's huge though, because to your joke earlier, Dan, about the Exalted Court, as someone who's run knights, that's what I've done in the past. It's like, oh, what am I coming up? Because technically, by the rules, you didn't have to use those stratagems until before the game, so you didn't have to declare it in advance. You did have to declare your warlord trait, your warlord. You did have to declare the relic that you get with your army, but stratagems for additional warlords, stratagems for additional relics, you didn't have to declare in your roster. Now you do, which also suggests that any kind of pre-game stratagem, and I don't know, is the kind of thing, are there any pre-game stratagems that don't relate to the army list? Because technically anything that it's almost as anything else that is done pre-game has to be included.
So there is a lot of them. So this is the problem. Now, when you talk about it, I'm not entirely sure whether it's first battle round or pre-game. For example, there's like one thing that costs 1 CP, roll a D3, and you regenerate command points. I don't know. Is that first battle round or pre-game? Joe, do you know?
It's just a warlord trait.
Oh, is it a warlord trait? Yeah, it's a marine thing. But anyway, that was the only thing that popped into my head that might be one of those.
Let me just check quickly.
I can imagine the reason why they've done this, though, is like how they've done the new Space Marine relics, where you're not limited by the number of relics you can take. So in theory, you could totally list tailor your army each time against your opponent and take, say, 5 or 6 different relics to counter your opponent, which is quite time-consuming and a bit unfair against those armies that don't have that ability. Yeah. So making people just get forced into a mono build, it gives a much more fairer and saves time and stuff as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think most people still abided by these rules without even necessarily being forced to do so. I think it was people who really kind of read the events pack and, not exploited, but ultimately, used that advantage as much as possible, who got the best out of their armies in those situations. But I think ultimately most people were doing this anyway. But it's just good that they've clarified it, because it's really important that they do that, which is good. So yeah, and also it specifies that you have to supply your written army list to your to the organisers.
It has to be typed.
And then you have to then supply it to your opponent. I can't remember if there is any penalty if you do not supply a typed army list. So I will check that in a moment. But
I have a question, Dan. Ooh. As someone who bought the fancy Chapter Approved 2018, which included a pad of roster sheets, can I no longer use those because I'd have to fill it in by hand?
I suppose you're going to have to go and forward your questions on to the good people of Warhammer World Events, but my assertion would probably be no.
What if you scanned it and then put it in on Paint?
Did Games Workshop give you copyright permission to reproduce those pages? Do you know, Rich?
I don't know.
Sometimes they used to, back in the day, they used to have pages which they say we give permission to allow people to reproduce these.
That's a good question. I'd have to get on and find. I mean, I've never actually used those sheets. It was nice they existed, but I don't use them because I like a regular person, just use Battlescribe.
Right, exactly. Anyway, let's talk about tournament scoring. So previously, tournament scoring was this weird, convoluted mixture of favourite games, favourite armies, and game score. Now it is just game score and favourite game score. So in terms of the game score, if you win, you get 10 points. If you draw, you get 5 points. And if you lose, you get 0 points. Favourite game score is worth 1 point per vote. And it is a private secret ballot that is voted for at the end of the event. So the maximum amount of points that you could achieve is 55. So if you got all 5 wins and then got 5 favourite game votes, you would receive 55 points. In addition to that, you need to document how many units you killed, and that will be used as a tiebreaker, essentially. So essentially, looking at this, there is no requirement for you anymore to document secondaries. So secondaries are no longer a concern. Now that may be a indication of whether or not secondaries will even exist in chapter approved 2019. They may have done away with secondaries in favour of, again, if you don't know the ITC, check out the people at Frontline Gaming, but they may have got rid of secondary scores in favour of some convoluted, tedious bookkeeping that people who like ITC seem to think is well good, even though it turns a game of 40k into the most laborious task of everyone has to turn up with a whiteboard, don't they? It's like the most frustrating thing ever when you play.
I think it's really
ITC.
interesting though. I think it's interesting the way they've changed the secondaries, because if you recall in this year's chapter approved, they adapted what was originally First Blood to become First Strike, so that both you and your opponent had the opportunity to get it, because usually it was whoever got the first kill would get it. So if you went first, you had an unfair advantage. Was that they changed it so in each of your first battle in the battle round in your turn, as long as you kill one unit, even if you went second, you still get the first strike. Now they've completely got rid of that. They've also got rid of Slay the Warlord, which again could be different depending on your army. Say for example you took Imperial Guard and you didn't take tons knights as allies, your warlord's going to be a bit squishy, whereas if you're say Tyranids or Space Marines, it's a bit unfair. Equally, the Line Breaker being removed as well does suggest that because there could be a scenario where it was a draw, but then just because one unit got its foot in, well not its foot, it just fell into the enemy deployment zone and then you lost the game. Is that fair? So I think it's interesting they got rid of them all. Assuming they might still exist. They might completely still be in the things. They're just not using them to affect your overall score.
Yeah, so they're not being documented for tournament score. That makes me speculate that they've probably removed them from the Eternal War missions, because I suspect that they will take the ITC pick your own secondaries as a mechanic. So I imagine GW will offer you 10 different secondary objectives, which will be kill the big thing. Basically it'll be all the stuff that's in ITC that I won't bother naming the specifics of. But the thing is it has been fairly evident that the consensus of the masses is that they love ITC stuff. Again, whatever. If GW implements it in a more balanced fashion, I'm going to be quite interested to see how they do that. But yeah, again, this is speculation on my part. But the fact that they are telling me that they don't look for Slay the Warlord, First Blood, or Linebreaker tells me that you're not always going to be trying to achieve those three things, which is why they brought it down to wins and losses. So yeah, really excited to see what they change. But yeah, that suggests to me that we won't be seeing universal secondary objectives in missions going forwards, at least for the 2019 season that is in 2020.
I don't think so. I disagree. I think they just aren't. They just don't want to use it. I don't see them adding in. Like you said, I don't see them adding in needless bookkeeping. I think that's what it is. I think they're trying to simplify it, maybe, or rather than making it so that someone could technically win all their games, but they didn't get necessarily all the secondaries, or something like that. But it'd be interesting to see. I will bet some 911 wings from our favourite establishment in Nottingham. Of you. In fact, I'll eat some 911 wings because that's usually too spicy for me. If you're right, because I don't see them going to bookkeeping.
I do wonder if the change in scoring is partly to, as you were saying, simplify bookkeeping, but also minimise the amount of potential cheating that could be going on. Because not that it did happen, but there was always talk that it would be quite easy to just tick all of your secondaries after your opponent had signed your sheet, and instead of handing it in, you quickly fill out those few bits. Whereas now with the kill points being the only thing, it's a lot easier to police that and making sure that your opponent writes that down and that's the only thing that's going on. So that could be one option as well, as in why they've done it. I do think there'll still be secondaries in the game, no matter what form that will be, whether you pick them or whether it's just a classic free, who knows?
No, that's fair enough. I think, we'll wait and see. It's speculating at this moment in time, but Richie and I now have a bet of the purchase and or consumption of 9-1 wings from a popular establishment should that occur. So let's talk about the codes of conduct. So this is a whole new and interesting addition because previously, if you were a naughty boy, maybe a judge would come over and go, "Oi, what are you doing?" And then you would go, "Whatever. What can you do, mate?" "I'm breaking the rules!" Sticking your fingers up and so on and so forth. Whereas now, they've actually put a code of conduct in place. Now, I'm going to be really interested to see how GW enforce all of this, but this is what they've committed to, and this is what they've stated, so let's hear them out. So, I won't bother with all the, preamble, but the whole thing is essentially stating that it's all about having fun and being sporting, but we accept that some people will take the mickey, and this is us trying to police that. So, first and foremost, if you're late, which is a scary situation for me to see, but if you're late, more than 15 minutes late to your game, you will receive a loss. So if you turn up 15 minutes late, say on the Sunday morning, you were out too late the night before, and you rock up, at 15 minutes, 30 seconds, your opponent is well within their rights to go, "Nah, sorry, pal, I'm going to take the win." So, yeah, how do you feel about that?
Does this mean you're casually going to be trying to rock up as close to the wire for registration as possible, or are you going to be a bit more willing to join the queue and wait it out like everyone else?
Oh no, God, I'm not joining that queue anymore. That's just such a false economy.
I'm with Dan on that. Forget that.
Yeah, that ain't happening. But I've never been late. I've never been late for one of my games. I've never missed a game at Warhammer World, nor have I been late. I push it. I push it. But I'm never late.
Especially back in when the Sunday game started earlier.
Well, yeah, those were. But yeah.
You've always made me extremely anxious with your timings.
Well,
the one time you made me drive to McDonald's literally 5 minutes before the game.
No. You make out 5 minutes before the game. It was 5 minutes before they opened the doors.
And I ran in to the room and Phil was already at the table waiting for me as a doubles event.
Yeah.
And you just sauntered off, not caring, late as usual.
Late as usual. I've never been late for a game.
Well, yeah.
The game started at 10:30. We arrived at 10:15. There was still 15 minutes before it started, so I had half an hour before I was technically late.
I was probably Dan's partner for this, and I don't remember him being late.
He's always late.
And I as much as I hate to support Dan on his lateness, I can't on this occasion say he was necessarily late.
I will acknowledge,
tardy perhaps, but not late.
I will acknowledge to my friends who put up with me and tolerate me during these weekends, I am not the most reliable person at waking up in the morning, nor am I the first one down in the hotel lobby ready to go. But I'm never late in terms of the actual event. Where it counts, I'm always on time. It's just I'm not very good.
What you're failing to tell the listeners, though, is the first game, you don't, even though there's a set time where it officially starts, most people tend to start 10 to 15 minutes before that, just to squeeze in some extra time. So actually, while you're not technically late, everyone else has already started their game and you're running behind.
Oh no! People starting early, you can't peg that on Dan.
Yeah,
that's not fair. That's not fair.
Right.
If other people start early because they've all got there early, that's not Dan's fault. He got there on time.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Just on time.
Yeah, just on time.
And again, guys, just so you know, I'm not enjoying defending him on this because I'm usually the first to complain about him.
Anyway, well, on the topic of complaints, Rich, if you and one other had valid complaints, how they validate these, I don't know, but if you and another had valid complaints against a player, a deduction of 10 points will be taken from their GT score. If we receive further complaints, so if you and two others complain with valid complaints, that player may be removed from the event. Please note, severe complaints, God knows what's a severe complaint in 40k, but severe complaints will lead to immediate disqualification and removal from the premises. Could you imagine getting the security guys ushering you out of a 40k tournament? I mean, don't get me wrong, anyone who achieves this has to be the stupidest
Whoa, you're going to edit that out.
like you've ever encountered.
I've got a family range.
We're incredibly sorry for the technical difficulties Lukatzer is currently experiencing. We'll be back as soon as possible.
Well, I mean,
Sorry, everyone. So we've come back because we had to sort of... Me using a very naughty word has created spun us into a loop. The point is, what I'm trying to get at is, you'd have to be a very naughty boy to do that. I mean, could you imagine what must you have done to get removed from the premises? I mean, that's a heck of a thing.
I mean, technically, if you already get in the initial the 2 valid complaints in the first place are upheld, then you lose 10 points, which basically means you've lost a tournament and you're not going to qualify. Basically, it basically means you're out. So you might as well go home anyway at that point. So being asked if there's so someone could just then kick off and be incredibly awkward because their entire trip's been a waste. So I could see someone then being like rude or aggressive, but that's just that kind of person. That kind of person should be removed anyway.
No, totally agree. But there you go.
What is interesting though is that while the first 2 complaints have to be valid, subsequent ones don't have to be.
I think the implication is that they must remain being valid.
You could just run over to him and be like, he farted into his hand and then cupped it over my mouth. And that it just could be completely made up.
By the wording of the rules pack, only the first 2, if we receive 2 valid complaints, is the first bit, and then the second part is if we receive further complaints. So they don't have to be valid after that.
There you go.
As long as once you've had the first 2 valid ones, anything goes. You're on thin ice, mate.
There you go. It's an interesting thing though as well, and I'm not saying for a moment that people will do this, and this paints a very unrealistic picture of people who play 40k, but you can imagine, right, if you got really disgruntled, if you lost like game 4 against someone you didn't overly like, and you thought, oh, he did me over there, that was rubbish, I'm going to go and complain about it, and then I'm going to get 2 of my mates to complain about it, and then, it's like I never lost. It's like, that's the only thing, because, I mean, I'm not suggesting people do that, but you just don't know, right? You give people the opportunity, how do you validate it, what do you say?
Sure they'd listen. They'd get both parties. They wouldn't just walk over and be like, we've had 3 people complain about you, and you'd be allowed to say, well, who has complained about me? What is their excuse? And if they go, this person and these 2 other people, so I didn't actually play either of those people and had 0 interaction with them whatsoever. This person is only complaining because they've lost.
Yeah. And then you could complain about them and they'd get ejected from the premises, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
I mean,
I imagine
it puts
it'd
a
be
lot
really...
on the judges, though. Yeah. It puts a lot on the judges, because it means if they're putting this code of conduct in place, the judges have to have upped their game behind the scenes of how they're going to approach all this. Because, like you say, people could abuse this, potentially abuse the system, especially if they are friends with the judges, because judges are humans, they have friends. There's nothing to suggest... There's a lot of standards they're going to have to hold themselves up to if they're going to be following it.
It's about time, though, because there are a lot of people in the past who have taken the mickey, and people have complained or said something to the GW officials, and they just kind of go, no, just shrug their shoulders and then just let it fly. And obviously people have complained, and I think it's got to that stage where the Games Workshop can't ignore it anymore.
Not clearly not, because here's the code of conduct.
I wonder if there will be a bunch of judges now, like more than the normal events team, to manage people potentially raising these queries, or because it puts it now in an atmosphere where, if you do something wrong, I'm not going to let it slide. I could just complain about you instead, and I hope that doesn't happen. And it's still a bit more laid back in terms of how the game gets played. So it'd be interesting to know if there's more judges on hand for these kind of rules questions or code of conduct issues, or if it would just be the same number of people and they're hoping it will just kind of play the way it always has done, which is where they very rarely rely on, judges for answering rules questions. Unlike in America, where it seems like if there's any issue, is you call over a judge. Whereas here, you call over a judge, they'd be like, what does it say in the rule book? And if you can't work it out, you tend to roll a dice or whatever. It's a lot more kind of not so serious in that respect.
So on that point, they do, in the rules dispute section, they do say that you should check the rules first because that's what the judges are going to do, which is good that they're kind of putting it in there, just being up, because what do you expect the judge to do? They're going to tell you to look at the rules and interpret the rules as they are written.
Some events have been known to basically go, who's the person making the argument, and be like, well, let me see in your rule book. And if that person doesn't have their rule book, then the choice goes to the opposing player.
Well, if they don't have their rulebook in this instance, they've not fulfilled the minimum obligation of the event. But anyway, one of the things that they've also added is more further clarification on painting. So if your miniatures do not fit the model requirements, and remember, there's a very nice new document that outlines model requirements. If your models do not meet those requirements, you will receive a penalty of 2 tournament points per unit that is not painted or modelled correctly. So this is going to be really interesting, because certainly when you play more and more at a kind of tournament level, I think there is probably less emphasis on modelling or creating a great looking coherent army, although they tend to be quite nice and coherent for what they are. But I've often seen people with arms missing. I think, Rich, you famously had the head roll off of one of your knights once, didn't you? And then couldn't find where it went.
Technically, my knight gallant still doesn't have a head. I never found it, and I haven't actually got. I've been playing knights for a little while, so yeah, I've not fixed it.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, mistakes and accidents can happen, but it's going to be interesting to see how people interpret that, because ultimately, if you're proxying, a captain with a shield captain or something, or whatever it is that you're doing that you've kind of maybe been used to doing in other kind of tournament settings, they're not going to fly at the Warhammer World Grand Tournament events going forwards, and they've been very rigid with how they've kind of constructed these rules. So you're either going to be told that you're receiving a 2-point reduction, or you're going to have to remove the model. Now, in some instances, depending on how far up you are in the situation, you may choose just to remove the model rather than take the reduction. I mean, Joe, if you were reprimanded with this problem, would you take the points reduction or would you remove the model?
Oh, well, I personally always make sure that my army is fully painted to a high standard. Either way, both things can result in you losing the game.
Well, the 2-point reduction won't necessarily result in you losing the game, but it will result in you not winning the tournament.
Yeah. So you just lose the model, wouldn't you, end of the day? But then it depends on what kind of model it is. Like, if it's a knight, for instance...
Yeah, take the 2 points.
You just take the 2 points. But if it's like an intercessor sergeant and his arm's fallen off, and it's like, I haven't got another one of those, you'll just be like, fine, I'll take it. And I'll just replace... I'll make sure he's... On lunchtime, I'll go and find a new arm for him.
Yeah.
I'd like to think there's some lenience here in terms of models that get damaged during the course of gaming, and I'm sure your opponent, if your model loses its head, in Richard's example, he won't suddenly be going off to the judge saying, oh, well, this is wrong, I want him to, take that model off, because I think most people are sensible in that respect.
But equally, there's nothing stopping them doing that.
Well, yeah, but I think the judge would come over and be sensible. Is that a valid complaint? You've just had your model damaged. I think you should have some lenience in that, and I'm sure the judges will kind of rule in your favour. And potentially, if you go up to the next game and say, oh yeah, just so you know, the head fell off, I've lost it, or I've not been able to have time to glue it back on, they'll probably be like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a difference where you turn up deliberately to an event where your model hasn't been painted sufficiently or hasn't been modelled correctly. That's where there should be an issue. It shouldn't be if your model gets damaged during the course of the event.
No, I agree. And it's for those scenarios where you have like a tank or a vehicle or a character which has got certain weapon options that you say, oh, it's got this, but he doesn't actually have it on the model. And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes can be important. I know. I remember an incident that at the last event we both came up across, because it wasn't the last one. It was a recent event we did a year or so back now, where and it's actually an interesting scenario because there isn't technically a Butcher Cannon model for the Leviathan Dreadnought. If you remember the one I'm talking about now, Dan?
Well, there is a Butcher Cannon model.
Right, but there's like a Butcher Cannon array for the Leviathan Dreadnought as a Chaos version. It doesn't actually exist. Most Chaos players, however, run it just using the Storm Cannons. And they'll use that because they don't sell arms for it with the Butcher Cannon array.
Yeah. But can't you take the Butcher Cannon on the Contemptor Dreadnought as well? But that's not an available choice.
Possibly. There's
Correct.
some sort of
Correct,
there's some weird thing where Forge World do it, but they don't do it for a Leviathan, basically.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's because I don't think there is actually a Butcher Cannon array, or there isn't anymore. No, you have to convert it. It's a converted thing. So, but I came up against the Grey Rider who had one, and I got messed around a bit because the Butcher Cannon array's got a longer range than Storm Cannons. So I was like, oh, there's a Leviathan over there. It's 30 inches away. It was like 36 inches. I don't have to worry about that. And then the next time he started shooting at me, I'm like, you can't shoot me. You've only got a 24-inch range. He's like, it's got Butcher Cannons. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's Storm Cannons. Yeah. He's like, oh, no. These are Butcher Cannons, totally. But it puts in an interesting situation because that model doesn't exist. Or they don't actually sell what you're supposed to put on it. So that means basically you have to convert it now, is what it means in that scenario. But I thought that was semi-relevant to this topic now, because if you have a vehicle with a certain weapon... So, for example, my Knight Gallant, I'm going to either have to convert or run with a melter gun, because I usually take it bare bones, but I did when I originally built it, put a melter gun on it, and I always tell people he hasn't got a melter gun. I just don't like the stubber, because the stubbers look silly. But now, by the rules, I have to actually fix that if I'm going to take that Knight Gallant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that's the thing, isn't it? And then you can find yourself in a situation, and that's the interesting thing, and the element that, again, these are not the sorts of things that I expect people to do. I don't expect people to do this, but you never know, because someone could, and if it mattered, right? If I turn up to an event and Richie's there with his Gallant with a heavy stubber, but it's not a heavy stubber, it's a melter gun, a little bit of me, even though I wouldn't do it, but a little bit of me would go, hang on a second here, that guy's got a melter gun. I could call him on that, and he got him banged to rights. And he'd either have to take the 2 points, which would cost him overall tournament performance, which remove the model, which, given what it is, I'd get some, I'd get a serious win here. So it's an interesting thing. Just do your models right, people. Do your models.
Well, exactly. It's like before, we've had this discussion at previous events, like people could do that, and they're within their right to go, well, actually, you're kind of doing a loose proxy on a model. It's giving me an unfair advantage because it's actually confusing me about what weapons it has. Yeah. And most people have been like, oh, but come on, like, you know what it is.
Yeah.
Don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
And I've always gone on the side of, but you know it, like, that you shouldn't be taking that to an event. And here, it at least writes it down in plain English, in no uncertain terms, that, yeah, your opponent could call you out if you've got any kind of proxy on your model, or there's something converted on it that's incorrect that you've not checked off. I mean, it could be, in that instance with the melter gun and the stubber gun, like maybe you email the events team and say, look, this is glued on. I don't want to run it as this. I'm kind of trading down. It's not actually a melter gun, it's a stubber. Is that an issue? And they might go, do you know what, that's fine.
Yeah.
But they might validly go around and no, you've got to pay the points for it.
I don't think they should. I think because it's fine for me to know what it is, but equally best. I mean, I've never done it, but someone could play it and they could forget that it hasn't actually got a melter gun. It's actually got a stubber.
Yeah,
it could be my opponent. That could affect how they're playing, because they'll see a Knight Gallant with a melter gun is a slightly different than a Knight Gallant with a heavy stubber. In how you would approach that. It's quite niche scenarios where that would be a thing, but it's about how it affects your opponent. Which is why I brought up the Chaos Leviathan Dreadnought with the Butcher Cannons, because I approached it. I looked at the model and I thought, okay, I know he's got a 24-inch range, so I positioned my army in a certain way. And then he said, okay, actually it's got these guns, so I'm in range. It's like, well, that's an example of why you can't proxy weapons like that, because it puts your opponent in a disadvantage. If I remember at the time, the guy was good about it and let me reposition my models, because I said to him, it's like, well, I would never have moved these guys here if they so to be in range, so I'd like to move them in slightly differently, because I would never have put these guys here within range of your guy, because because that's why I asked you how far to confirm with you the range is over 24. Yeah. And if I recall, he was okay with it.
I mean, in the past, and I still stand by this, in most instances, I'm all right with some weapon proxying as long as the profile of the miniature isn't overly altered. So, if it is that you're using a Talos and it's got splinter rifles on the back of it, and you say, hey, all my Talos have got haywire blasters, I'd just be like, all right, fair enough. I can retain that information and remember it because most people will, make that very clear. And again, it's a Talos or some kind of weird wibbly weapon. I mean, when someone points at a homunculus for me and goes, oh, this homunculus has got a liquefier gun, I don't look at it and go, well, hang on, mate, that's actually a hex rifle, because I don't know the difference really. And that's one of those things where there are certain instances where I'm cool with it. Again, it's one of those situations where Marines probably suffer more than anything because everyone knows what a melter gun looks like, everyone knows what a flamer looks like, everyone knows what a plasma gun looks like, so it becomes complicated for them. But
how do you think you'll be if you come up against a guy and he's like, oh, I've got Stalker bolt rifles, and they're not, they're one of the others, they're just a normal gun?
Again, I'd be fine with that. If it was an intercessor squad and everything was the same and he just told me that everything's Stalker bolt rifles, I'd just be like, fair enough. If it was that one squad was Stalker, one squad was bolt rifle, one squad was assault or auto, then I'd be like, well, I can't let that slide because I can't remember what's what, and neither can you. So in those instances, no. But if you tell me every intercessor's got a Stalker bolt rifle, I'm not gonna kick up a fuss about that. What do you reckon, Joe?
I think. But my general idea of the whole situation is that so each of these events is going to be the grand tournament, and then you're going into the Champions League, whatever it is. So Games Workshop, being the flagship of its own product, wants to be showing the very best version of this game. So that at any point, your army could end up on the live stream.
Yep.
And they want to show the very best to the world. This is how you could play this game at home. So they're going to want to make sure that everything is kosher, everything is WYSIWYG, and obviously you've got to know your army's rules inside out. Your opponent has to know all of your rules inside out, because that's what they want to show. This is like the pro tour now, the level of what we're in. So I think at this point now, we're at a stage where everything has to be perfect. I think. And the same, so if you're, I think, even down to the level of bolt rifles and stuff, I think, because I want to run in my army 3 squads of 5 guys with Stalker bolt rifles, and then 1 big 10-man squad with normal bolt rifles. So I'm going to go and exchange those out, because when it comes to the tournament, I don't want my opponent, who, given the rules pack, now has legitimate reason to go to an official and be like, his gun scopes aren't that big and his magazines are curly, not straight. Kind of thing.
But I think if you're in that example though, Joe, if you're running a big squad of 10 with bolt rifles and then 3 squads of 5 with stalkers, I think you should ensure that everything's correct in that instance. But if everything's the same,
but even if everything's the same, and you have that chance to go onto live stream and they look at your list, they say, okay, these guys have got bolt rifles, these guys have got auto bolt rifles, and these have got standard bolt rifles, and they look at your army and they go, well, you've got a weird mishmash. We just can't let that fly.
No, I agree with you. What I'm saying is if everything's the same. So if you've used normal bolt rifles and you say everything's a stalker, I don't think that matters so much. Because
but why take that risk that your opponent could call you out on?
I think it.
Especially on such a tournament level.
Yeah.
I think it does, because it's a shorthand. Because you're kind of disrespecting the models, because because they do exist. If you wanted to make them auto boat rifles, they do look different. Yeah. So it's like it's the point, to Joe's point of it's having the best version of the models that exist, but also as your opponent, you should be able to look at the model and know what it is by looking at it.
Yeah.
Because that's why we've made it so that you can tell the difference between the Stalker bolt rifles and the regular bolt rifles and the assault bolt rifles, because it's distance.
Yeah, and someone watching on the live stream. So, for instance, your opponent's running 3 Ravagers and they've all got Dark Lances on them, but you're actually running those as Disintegrators. Someone on the live stream watching it and goes, "Why is that Ravager putting out 9 shots and not 3?" And I'll put it up, and then they'll complain and be like, "Oh, this guy's cheating," and then they'll just start saying horrible things about him and be like, "Oh, this guy's cheating, like stop him from cheating." Which is misrepresenting that guy, because he's been allowed to use this thing, which isn't representing what it should be, and is inadvertently getting a bad name for himself because someone's overreacted.
I just think we need, again, you're absolutely right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that I think, for me personally, I still think you need to exercise a small amount of leniency in some areas, which they're illustrating here. They're saying you don't obviously need to worry about grenades or pistols or things that are like, if it is that you've got to do with a bolt gun, you don't need to make sure that he's got the holster with a pistol on it and so on and so forth, which is all sorts of fair enough. It's just that thing. I don't know. I mean, we could go round and round in circles on this. I think I've made my thoughts on that sort of stuff clear in the past, but I agree with all of your stuff as well. I think that I work hard to ensure that my army is what I say it is. The only example of where that hasn't been the case is in the recent instance at GT Heat 2, where I was running Sam Hand colour scheme as Eltok. I checked that with the tournament organisers before going, and they said it was fair enough. But maybe I wasn't so specific with my colour scheme, but no one had an issue with it at the event. But if someone did have an issue with it, and I remember talking to Joe about this beforehand, if someone had said to me, "Hang on a second there, pal, these are clearly Sam Hand," I would have respected that opinion and gone, "Okay, fine, then that's what they are." But my I think, I don't know. I just a little bit of leniency if we can, but completely agree. Shall we move on and talk about collusion and bribery, or did you want to go into rules disputes? Because rules disputes feel like
Actually, I was just going to say, because you don't have to model pistols. I think you do. It doesn't say it does. I can't. I was looking for the line about pistols and grenades don't matter, and I can't find it.
So if you go to model requirements,
unless I'm
in the other doc.
Yeah, so sorry, it's in a different docs. So, under each model must accurately represent the entry in your army roster. There are a few exceptions to this rule. Similar equipment that doesn't come on every model, such as grenades, is one such exception. So, yeah.
What doc is that in?
That is in the model requirements doc. That is a different doc.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think there's more interesting things in that document that we not talked about. One of them is basing sizes. So it basically says, for this event, you have to have the exact base size that your model is meant to come on. And in the case of, say, orcs, which have gone from 28 to 32, you have to rebase them to be on the right size. They say for other events, it doesn't matter so long as you scale down your base rather than scale up.
I thought scaling up was
it's the other way around. You're allowed to scale it up in the case of like dioramas and stuff, and you want a more interesting model, but you can't scale down, which seems odd to me because with auras and stuff, you'd have thought it would be more beneficial to scale your base up.
That sucks for Harlequin players, because a lot of Harlequin players put Harlequins on 32mm bases over 25 just because they stand up. And it stops you having to put 1p coins or 5p coins on the bases of all your models to kind of stop them toppling over all the time.
Yeah, it also means all the converted models that I've done this year for my Inquisition that I technically can't take to a GT anymore now because they're all on incorrect base sizes.
Yeah, that is 100% correct. You can't even use your Crusaders, can you? Because they're on 25mm.
Well, this is where you could potentially question it because, like, there are no legitimate models for it. And I think the one that comes from there's one because can you buy the old ones?
Yeah, you can buy the old ones.
Yeah.
No, but then weirdly, I'm pretty sure the new Blackstone Fortress one.
Yeah, but that's
is
a character.
32. Well, I know, but then it's like no, I agree. It's weird though because it's technically the same unit. in terms of what it is.
Well, no, because he's a character, so he's got a bigger base, much like how a captain has a bigger base than a regular Marine.
Well, yeah, there you go.
There you go. Well, at least a Primaris one. Bizarrely, if you're a regular Marine captain, a mini Marine captain, you stay on the same side base as a regular Marine. Weird logistical madness. Anyway, shall we talk about rules disputes? So, we understand that situations arise in a game where rules may be questioned, and that's a reasonable scenario to have unfold. But essentially, what will occur if you raise a concern? First, we encourage players to check through rules, publications, and FAQ before questioning a judge. But should you need to talk to a judge to make a ruling, we expect players to respect the decision. We will also issue a warning first if you argue with judges. So, if the judge comes up and says, well, I reckon it's this, you go, you sure, mate? Because actually, if you look at a warning, and then if you don't pay attention to that warning, he'll slap you with a 5-point penalty. What do we reckon of that?
It's fine. I think if you're going to argue with him, you need to have the perfect argument. So you need to have. So say, for instance, he looks in your codex and goes, "It says in your codex, this is what it is," and you go, "I accept your answer, but I would like you to know that there is in your most recent FAQ, it contradicts this and says this." Then I think that's fine, and then that he can then make he can either change his decision or keep it. But if you go, "I disagree with this entirely because it basically puts my army in a negative situation," then yeah, you're going to take those points.
Indeed.
I think some of it will come down to, as we alluded to before, to judges, the decisions the judges make. Because in theory, yeah, if the judge makes a ruling, you should abide by it. Because if you've called them over, to adjudicate and then they don't adjudicate in your favour, you that's not how it works. It's like, by the fact that between you and your opponent, you said, okay, we've reached an impasse here. We don't agree on the rules. We need a third party to come in and make that decision for us. If that doesn't go your way, you acquiesce the responsibility by saying, "Judge, make a decision." If that judge makes a decision that doesn't go your favour, you have to accept that, and that will be tough. Especially if the judge makes which will ultimately be seen as a bad decision. But ultimately, you get a warning, and if the warning, because then it comes down to the judge, because they should say, "I'm giving you a warning. This is my decision." End of. And you can't deal with that. You can't argue that at that point. It's like you just have to accept that and move on.
I mean, it's pretty clear cut to me. I've never argued with a judge's decision in a tournament. I've rarely been in a situation where a judge was required, but when I have completely accepted the outcome, as I'm sure everyone else has. Then we go on to an interesting one, collusion and bribery. And this essentially states that if players are found to be fixing results or offering or accepting bribes, because obviously this means that much, they may be disqualified from the event. So if you are taking bribes or fixing results, you will be disqualified. Additionally, we expect all players to respect fellow participants by not interfering with other games. Players seeking advice from other persons during a match or players offering advice may receive a 5-point penalty. So that's interesting. So full disclosure on my part, I would have definitely received a 5-point penalty at the last GT because I was watching a game happening to the left of me as my opponent was setting up, and I saw some things that I was a little bit like, I don't think that's right. So I immediately interjected and was like, I think you'll find that's not correct, and informed the individual that I felt was being negatively affected by the misrepresentation of the rules, how I would deal with that situation or what I would do to counter what that person was doing. And then immediately realised what I was doing and felt super bad about it, and then kind of apologised to both people and was like, really shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry. I feel like an idiot, and then offered to buy them drinks and do whatever I could to make myself seem like less of an arse. But
so just to clarify, Dan, what you did was you offered advice and then you bribed them.
Yes, exactly right.
Down.
Exactly right. I tried to bribe them, so I should have got disqualified by these codes of conduct.
So I think
Yeah.
So what we basically need to do now for tournaments is essentially look at them almost like an exam level event. So, because the amount of times that we ourselves, we go to tournaments as a group, and say, for instance, I finish my game in an hour and 15 minutes. I still have an hour and 15 minutes to kill until the end of the event. That means that I cannot go from Phil's table to Dan's table to Richie's table chatting and essentially distracting them and backseat gaming.
Well, there's nothing wrong with you going up to us and be like, how's your game going? Yeah. Doing well? Yeah. You don't have to, you've never come up to me and been like, I think you should do this with your models. Yeah. But there's no reason why you can't be social.
At the last tournament, though, you played against a Dark Eldar player, and he was doing this, and I said, no, you can't do that because I think he was trying to range, he was going to shoot something. I said, no, they haven't got range 24, they've got range 18. So by the new rules...
No, that's okay.
That's okay?
Yeah, because you weren't giving advice. If you comment, just reading the rules, if you comment and say, actually, you're not allowed to do that, or you correct a rule of the way the game is being played, that's not part of the problem. It's when you want advice. If it's when you ask someone for help, e.g., and I'm gonna do a Dan, and so there's been times in the past we've been like, oh crap, I'm playing against Harlequins. Joe, how do I beat you? Normally, I've hands on done that. It's now not allowed though, so I won't be doing it in the future. But that's what they mean. It's interfering in the decision-making process of how the people are playing the game. So in your example, you saying, actually, mate, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
If you'd followed up with, I'd actually do this, that's wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
But just like commenting on how the game is being played, so actually you can't do this, or this is what that does. Just speaking factually, that's not against the rules.
I don't know. That's still interfering in the game on some level.
So I think what they're kind of looking at now is basically your game is your game. Once you're finished, you go and sit in Bugman's, you go and have lunch, you go shopping, you go look around the hall, in the miniatures hall. Maybe they're just looking to have less loiterers around tables, because you may not be upset by the idea of me stood there watching over your game, but I'm also not a very small person. I'm a big hairy bearded man. So to your opponent, my presence could put them off, kind of thing.
Mm. Well, I remember at the last GT, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but wasn't there one game you were playing and you were playing your opponent had his mate next to him the entire time?
Yeah. That has happened on more than a handful of occasions. Yeah. So I've occasionally, I mean, probably 1 in 20 games, I'd say, I've played at tournaments where either someone's girlfriend or someone's friend is with them for whatever reason, and kind of accompanying them through the thing. And look, I wouldn't like to suggest in any instance that has, dramatically changed the outcome, but it's reasonable to assert that it had an impact.
I would expect to. In that instance, the other guy apologised after the game, if I recall.
He might well have done. Again, I'm not looking to kind of name names or be unreasonable, because I actually really, I mean, the game in question I utterly enjoyed. Obviously, I would have preferred to have won it, but at the same point, I made a number of mistakes in that game, which I take accountability for. But at the same point, I think, who knows what happened there. But I think, it's happened on a few occasions where I've played against people with 2 people sat across from me, and a lot of the time that person has been relatively inconsequential to the outcome, but you don't know, even just having someone to sound off things with when you say, right, well, he's doing this, just even actually going through the process of trying to explain to someone what's happening may trigger responses or ideas that you might not have otherwise had if you were more dialed into the game. So I'm entirely in favour of, I don't think you need like a classroom system where no one can come and approach you, but you certainly don't need situations where people are over your shoulder. I mean, that happened to me a lot in the last GT as well, is that certain people that I knew would finish their game super quick and come and sit next to me and be like watching the game, and offering comments and stuff. So I like the fact that they've tried to address that. So yeah, there you go. They've also got rules for cheating. I mean, obviously, in a way, it feels like that's everything that's been described here. But if a player is found to have been knowingly cheating, that player will receive a loss for the round in question. If a player is found to have been cheating multiple games, they will be disqualified from the event. So if you cheat a lot, you're going to get disqualified. That seems straightforward enough, don't you reckon?
Oh, God, yeah.
Don't cheat. You don't. You can be, unknowingly cheating in both, and then it's okay. You can still get ejected. So you can only be knowingly cheating in one game.
Yes.
But if you've been unknowingly cheating in multiple games, then that's equally can be a punishment.
I love you lawyering all the wording on this stuff. They need an FAQ for this.
As a subscriber of the competitive 40k Facebook group, is what we do.
Well, indeed. And then lastly, slow playing in chess clocks. If a player is found to be playing slowly for advantage, we may issue a point penalty of up to 10 points. So I think this is the only one where they've stated it's up to, suggesting that it could be a variable amount of points between 0 and 10. But anyway, depending on the situation, obviously. We do not use chess clocks at our events, and we do not expect anyone to be forced to use one. If a player is forcing people to play using a chess clock, then we will ask that player to stop and issue them a penalty of 10 points to their GT score. So, no chess clocks, boys.
Yeah, well, that's a hangover from ITC, because they have a ruling where if one player wishes to use a chess clock and another one doesn't, then they have to use the chess clock. Which is a weird one, because I think they've ruled it in favour, because if you don't want to use the chess clock, then you're clearly hiding something, kind of thing. Whereas if you know, but then if you're not used to using a chess clock, then that obviously doesn't help you at all.
Mm.
So
I think it's good though, because to your point, if the assumption is, if you're in a culture where if you don't use the chess clock, the assumption is you're cheating. That's something you're then projecting onto that player who doesn't normally use chess clocks. So to force someone to use a chess clock is basically saying, if you don't do this, I know you're a cheater. And that kind of undertone. So I like the fact that they're saying, we don't like slow play, but also we don't like forcing anti-slow play measures on people either.
Yeah. But then,
because I think there's a lot of people that come to these events with the ITC rules in mind. So maybe that's happened in the past where people have been like, oh yeah, I can use a chess clock and you've got to use it because that's the rules. Having never read the Warhammer World Event Pack, maybe, because they've just done ITC events. So it's good that they put this in there.
No, I totally agree. I think, I'm not a fan of using chess clocks. I've never had an army that's slow played, and I've never used slow playing to my advantage. So, it's never been an issue for me necessarily, so I've never really worried about it. I've played in some events where people want to use chess clocks, and I've kind of gone, well, I haven't got one, and I don't really understand why you feel like we need to use one, but yeah, I'll press a button if that's what you think, but it never ever even come close to using the time allocated on it, because, I tend to work out what I'm doing during the course of their turn. Some of the nuances of the chess clock stuff as well has always been really weird to me. The whole idea that we've entered into a rules dispute about something, yet it's on my time, and that stuff. I was like, in those situations, like, well, yeah, if we're going to talk about this rule for the next 5 minutes, can I just not do it on my time? And it's like, well, no, because it's a thing that affects your turn. I'm like, well, hang on, feels a little bit ridiculous. But anyway, that's an aside. I think, long story short, I've never felt the need to use them. I just don't to the point. But obviously, there is a valid reason for them, and people do like to use them. But there you go. So closing things out, in terms of the awards, you can get the Grand Tournament Champion Award. That's the person who came first overall. You can come second or third place. You can receive a Favourite Player Award. So for the player with the highest favourite game score with the highest overall ranking as the tiebreaker, you can also get a Best Army nominee or finish first, second, third in Best Army. Interestingly, there is no mention of the Knight of the Inner Circle award. I'm not sure if Knight of the Inner Circle is being shelved for these events or what the qualifying criteria is, because for other Warhammer World events, in order to receive a Knight of the Inner Circle, you need to get 5 favourite game votes and 5 favourite army votes. Given that you don't have favourite army votes in this event, I'm guessing Knight of the Inner Circle is no longer a factor. But that's, again, a bit of guesswork.
That would make sense, though.
Yeah. Be a shame, though, not to be able to hand out Knights of the Inner Circle during a GT event.
Well, I think it might be that they're still valid for other events, because I haven't looked at the Throne of Skulls event pack in detail, but they might still have the double voting for best army and best
I'm sure they will do.
Game.
No, I'm sure the Knight of the Inner Circle is going nowhere. I just think it's a specific thing for non-GT events, which is fair enough. And that is the new Grand Tournament event pack. I feel like we've talked at great lengths about it, but let's...
Hold on. There's something you forgot.
Oh, really?
Please
elaborate.
There's no quiz.
What do you mean, no quiz?
There's no quiz. There used to be a quiz. It started to come back. It's not there. It's gone.
Also, I'd like to say that scraping in the background is not me. That is Phil.
I don't know what you're on about. Of course it's not me working on my Inceptors. How dare you?
How dare you? But no, what's the point about the quiz, Rich? Because
they used to do a quiz on the first night.
Oh, right. I thought you were talking about our quiz.
No. It's in the event pack.
Right. Okay. Good. I was thinking to yourself, hang on, Rich. I thought maybe we were doing a quiz, but no. Now you make sense. They're not doing a quiz as part of their event, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Beautiful.
That's what I mean.
Good. I'm glad
for those people who are interested in that fact.
Well, we liked the quiz, didn't we?
Mm.
They have been a little bit lackluster of late, though. The good old days of throwing big dice and having quite a big attendance has kind of gone away. It always sort of feels a bit lackluster these days.
Yeah. And arguing with the quizmaster.
I do like to argue with a quizmaster. It's all the fun.
You should get points deducted for that.
Well, exactly, they should add that to the tournament pack. But look, in conclusion, these are the new things. Let's have some final thoughts on it. Joe, what do you reckon?
I'm super happy with it. If they made it in a way that you could actually buy tickets without having to do a mad rush and constantly watch their website, that would be useful. But I am happy that the way they've done it now, because a tournament actually feels like a proper official tournament. With it's always felt very, very half-assed in the past, and it's just like turn up, play. We've stamped it with a grand tournament title, but that doesn't really mean anything. Now we're kind of going into this new age of full rules. This is official. Like I think this now is the basis for where they want to see the game go in the future.
At least in a competitive sense, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Cool, man. No, fair enough. Phil, what do you think?
I think if you're into competitive gaming, then this is going to be right up your street and is absolutely perfect. I think this is now almost like driving me out of the event and making me not want to go to it, purely because of some of the model requirement issues. And it's definitely much more of a competitive game. There's less, there's still awards for painting and stuff, but normally I go to try and either get a painting award or try and get as many favourite game, favourite army votes as I could get. And that normally bumps up my score, whereas now it's like, I'll predominantly always be at the bottom tables, potentially. So, and if I've spent a good portion of last year making models that I want to take to an event and I can't take them to the next event, why would I want to go? I still intend to email them and find out what they actually say, because they do say, check your conversions. But if they're going to interpret those base size rules for every single model, and I can't take my Inquisition, for example, then I'll be like, maybe I don't want to go to this event. And I I personally feel like I'd much more enjoy going to a Throne of Skulls or one of the campaign weekends now over going to the GT.
No, that's fair enough, mate. Rich?
I mean, I think it's a slightly moot point, seeing as we're never going to be able to buy tickets to these things anymore. But
oh, Rich, we lost you.
Really, no laughter. Okay, fair enough.
Oh, sorry, I thought we lost you. Were you waiting, pausing for laughter?
Yeah, sorry. I thought it was good though. To talk about.
You needed to insert a badum.
Sorry, I should have got a badum tush ready. No, I mean, joking aside about how hard it is to get tickets for these events now. It's interesting. I like the idea that they're making it more. They're making it more competitive, but laying out what the ground rules are and being transparent with that's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to do with the rule set and all that, the code of conduct and stuff. To Phil's point, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be something I'd want to go to in the future, just because if it is going down the more hardcore competitive route, it's harder for me to. I'm not that good at it. I mean, I still like to go because I like the idea of winning, although I've not done it very often. But I do like the idea of winning, so I'd like to give it a go to see what it's like. But that might be difficult to actually get tickets for now. But I'm more inclined to try and go to some of the more less tournament friendly less like professional events, as it were. Not that they're not professional in general, but they would possibly be more appealing to me, as I'm not that good a player, and I'm possibly more likely to get tickets. P.S. You guys, please respond to my message about buying tickets to the next Throne of Skulls.
For my side of things, obviously, personally disappointed that I missed the boat on this first one. I definitely am keen to attend one of these Grand Tournament events, and hopefully by the grace of God or any other, deity, I will be able to secure a ticket for this February event and attend. But if not, I'll definitely be keeping my eyes peeled for the next one. I'm with Joe in as much as I'm in favour of the event. I think it's an interesting change of pace for them. And I'm a big fan of going to Warhammer World Events for hanging out with you guys, hanging out with meeting new people and so on and so forth. It's always really cool. But I love the competitive element of the game, but I also love the actual kind of pecking order that it creates. The thing I really, really struggle with in Throne of Skulls is the way that they score the thing, and it just irks me. I mean, the fact that me and Phil went to a Throne of Skulls, won all 5 games, and came, 8th place, Phil?
Yeah, was that in a Throne of Skulls? Because that was a doubles one. But
yeah, it was a doubles
Throne
of
Skulls. Not the doubles tournament.
No, it was a doubles Throne of Skulls, so we won all 5 games. And to be fair to us, we still got quite a reasonable amount of favourite game and favourite army votes. I think we got 3 of each, if I'm not mistaken, or 2, 3, something like that. And even with all of that, we and bear in mind, we were the only team in the entire event to get 5 wins, and we came 8th. I mean, that's ridiculous. I can't get my head around that.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think you got as many favourite game votes as you thought you did, because I think the thing with that Throne of Skulls was you get at least at that event there was significantly more points for favourite game votes and favourite army votes than at the tournaments. So the players you picked didn't win as many games, but because they had more favourite game votes and favourite army votes, they came higher. I think that was it, unless I'm completely wrong.
I mean, I think the weighting for favourite game votes on that one is probably a bit too high versus this one, which is crazy low, but that's fine because the people who go to these events don't really want them and get annoyed about it because the people that go kind of don't put that much effort into their painting because they are chasing that meta. I mean, I'm sure there are people that are really good painters that are really competitive and go to these events, and that's great, but the vast majority of them are going not to do that. And because we went to the last GT final, and the painting quality overall was the shoddiest I've ever seen it. Like the stuff that made it into the cabinet was still fantastic because there were people that were both competitive or kind of skimmed in, a bit like how I have for the next one, because of favourite game and favourite army votes. So there will be good armies in the final, but the vast majority of people that are going on that competitive level just don't have a decent painting standard. So I can see why they've just got rid of it, because this event is all about finding who can play 40k the best. It doesn't really matter how well you paint it. No,
I totally agree. But no, look, I mean, I think, as I say, the Throne of Skulls stuff, I'm happy to go along and enjoy. I think, they've come a long way from a few years ago when, I mean, crikey, it's now probably more like 4 years ago when we used to go up to these events and come away just massively disappointed, because it used to be that you'd get up on the stage and they'd go, right, the winner is these people, thanks, bye! And it was like, what? Like, that was it? Didn't even tell you where you placed or anything, so they've definitely improved since those dark days, but yeah, I will gladly go along and take part in Throne of Skulls with you guys. But I'm very excited about the opportunity of potentially qualifying to take part in their Masters event. Not that there's any guarantee that I'll be able to achieve that, but again, I remain hopeful, and I'll continue to work on it and see if it can happen. But again, hopefully I'll get a ticket for February. Joe, you up for February if 2 tickets come available?
Yeah, I'm down for that. I'd happily give it a crack, because I achieved my goal of this year, which was to qualify for a final, and I actually somehow managed to place 10th, which is huge for me. So, like, my new goal is to get in the top 5 of the actual final. And I'm going to be basically playing and play testing as much as I possibly can up until then. So if I can get into the Masters and get into the top 5, I'll be elated. I can just quit the hobby there.
Indeed. There is no top 5 in the Masters, though, mate. There's only a top 8 or a top 4.
Yeah. My question now is that if you run a Space Marine army, can you be a successor chapter of a second founding chapter?
Can you be a successor chapter?
I know this one. The answer's no.
Oh.
So for example, you can't be a successor of the Crimson Fists because they are themselves a successor.
Yeah.
Why were you hoping to take Crimson Fist abilities, were you?
Well, no, I was thinking about what the new Black Templars could be bringing to the game, because I wanted to paint some Black Templar models to go into my Celestial Lions, because it's part of their fluff. But it's one of those like.
But you'd have to run them as Black Templars.
I'd have to run them as Black Templars. But then it'd be a case of I'd have to run the whole Black army as Black Templars. But I can't do that because one half of my army would be black and one half would be gold.
Yeah.
Well, no, you'd have to run them as a separate detachment that are Black Templar chapter. And then your Celestial Lions would have to be run as a successor chapter.
Yeah. That just sounds like way too much hard work, so I'm just gonna.
And then you wouldn't get your doctrine bonuses.
Yeah. So I'll just bin that idea off straight away.
Well,
one thing I don't add is if we do get tickets do come available for February, I would like to go.
Awesome.
Because I was disappointed that I didn't qualify this year, so I would like to try again. But
I think personally, we don't. If we were to do it, and I'm sure no doubt my arm will get twisted to do it at some point. I think February is probably the worst time to do it, purely because chapter approved will be coming out late November, December time. The meta will be kind of in a weird flux, and actually, that's the biggest shift in the meta is always after chapter approved. Whereas you'd be much better off waiting until after like at least one FAQs come out in like March time and doing a later one when you kind of know what you're going up against. Unless you like that kind of mystery box of meta that this will bring.
February's the time to strike.
speaking as someone who's lived through 2019, I don't think the chapter approved is the big change to the meta. It's the Iron Hands Codex. What is the new Iron Hands Codex going to be? What's the next version of that?
Well, indeed. Anyway,
I mean, it was a good 2 weeks of it though.
Well, exactly.
What a 2 weeks it was.
All right, guys. Well, look, I think that pretty much concludes this segment. We've spoken for quite a considerable time about the changes to Grand Tournament. So, with that all said, let's transition now to whatever it is that comes next. Thank you, please. Woo! Welcome back, everyone. This section of the podcast is dedicated to the art of constructing army lists. Whether you're a, matched play 40k fanboy, or you're more interested in the narrative, what we hope to do here is try to dispel certain myths, ideologies, or, assumptions around the majesty that is list construction. Joining me in this segment is good old Joe.
Hello.
And, of course, Phil. How you doing, Phil?
I'm very well, thanks.
There we go. So it's reasonable to assert that each one of us approaches the game in a different way and ultimately has a different outcome or objective for the army lists that we construct. Joe, I would say these days you're much more of a competitive player, though you have, heralded from a more fluffy background once upon a time. Is that not right?
That is correct. I used to be one of those, I've got to be purist and I've got to run the army like how it should be run because that's how the books and Black Library tell me. But in tournaments, that doesn't necessarily work. So I've had to adapt my style, and also things like money as well is quite often a factor. So by chasing the meta, you do inevitably end up having to spend more money on your armies, and that's not something that I've kind of wanted to do in the past.
It is a constant concern, isn't it? The fact that you're always having to drop more and more money on chasing that meta. But, what with being employed by a model shop these days, it's probably helped not a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's helped me out to no end.
There you go. How about you, Phil? Would you describe yourself as a hardcore competitive player?
Of course I am. And see, people that listen to podcasts probably realise that is a joke. No, I'm not at all. I try and do it within reason when we go to tournaments, but I sort of feel a little bit handicapped with my army selection that I've got, because you can only go so far with a codex, and then I can only go so far with the models that I've got, for example, or just my willingness to sort of break the immersion of what would be a sensible army, as Joe was saying, versus just spamming whatever units are most competitive. So, yeah.
Well, I suppose, Phil, in many ways, you've just opened up into an interesting side of the topic, which is obviously things such as spamming. So, I guess from the outset, the important thing to consider when it comes to list construction is to think about the objective of the game that you're approaching. Are you playing with your friends? Are you going to an organised event, either a campaign weekend or a tournament? Each of those different variables brings a number of different varying outcomes, as obviously is obvious. A lot of the time, certainly within friend groups, I find that list tailoring is probably the most commonplace. Wouldn't you agree, Joe? You've suffered at the hands of list tailoring by your friends on many an occasion, I imagine.
I have by you. I sent you a list the other day, and then you turned up and you smashed me with an army that should never have been.
Well, hang on. We agreed that was not the case. You're just throwing me under the bus again here, Joe, for no good reason.
The definition of list tailoring for people that don't understand is when you send your trusted friend Dan an army list.
Oh yeah, specifically Dan.
We're going to use the name Dan. It doesn't reflect to any person.
They usually have that name, don't they?
Yeah. And you go, we're going to have a game. This is the list I'm going to use. And then that person looks at that list. Because they're scum, they go, I'm just going to take a list to counter everything that you've got on here. And then they turn up and then they destroy you.
So I mean, obviously, without wanting to, get too drawn into this outrageous, accusation that you're making towards me at this moment in time, I think, list tailoring is one of the interesting early things that you kind of see. And again, I think, without going off on too much of a tangent, sorry, excuse me. without going off into too much of a tangent, I think, ultimately this is one of the early kind of examples of, competitive gaming or competitive building that most people have encountered in their own hobby. I think, when you're playing with a group of friends on a regular basis, there is an arms war that kind of takes place, an arms race even that takes place, that people engage in, and people feel compelled to add units and add, different warlord traits or abilities to try and, outdo their friends. And I think that's certainly in the sort of initial instances where it begins. But I think if we were to talk about, and I suppose we'll look at it, first of all, in more of a kind of narrative approach. And I guess, Phil, you're probably the best man to speak to in the initial instance about narrative approaching. When you're conceiving or thinking about building a narrative force, what's the main motivating factor for you? What are you hoping to achieve with that?
I think it's a tough one. I think, if you're going to the very sort of initial instance of building an army, and that's probably going to like choosing a faction or an army that you're going to collect. Like if we're talking about collecting a brand new army, what do you do? I think you've got to sort of go with a bit of a gut instinct in terms of what you feel most drawn to, or what potential play style might fit you, or potentially you've just read some Black Library books and you really like a particular army that you've read about, or that you've seen in some videos or computer games or whatever it might be. And then once you get to that point and you start going, okay, how do I go about constructing this list, is actually really difficult. And trying to find something narrative it's quite difficult to start off with. We've talked about the sort of 1K Space Marine project and how we're starting about it. So I was sort of torn between Black Templars, potentially Death Watch, and then Minotaurs. And then I've sort of ended up going with Minotaurs. And that's because I had the Fall of Orpheus campaign book, which features Krieg and Minotaurs and Necrons. And I bought that book probably 6 or 7 years ago now, which is when I first got into collecting Krieg. And from that, I've always had in the back of my mind, wouldn't it be nice to do a Minotaurs army? So I've always used that book as a source of inspiration. And then when I've sort of started this project, I sort of went back through and looked at that book, looked at the artwork and kind of the general army style, and reading the background on that chapter to work out what sort of play style they have. And it's kind of a very sort of fast, aggressive, almost like a kind of drop assault force where they all come down at once. They tend to mobilize their whole army at once, so they tend not to split their chapter up too much. So when they come to a fight, they're bringing the full force of their whole chapter, not just like 10 or 100 men. It's like the full 1,000. So I sort of wanted a play style that would maybe reflect that potentially. But I do say it's pretty hard in terms of knowing which angle to go at. So especially if you've never played that army before, you don't actually know how it plays on the tabletop. And as much as you want to do something narrative, sometimes there's always that little thing in the back of your mind going, yeah, but if you take this unit, it will be slightly more competitive because that's what the internet says. So it's sometimes a bit of a balancing act between maybe taking a few things that you think will be more competitive than what you want to take, or you just throw that out completely and you just go, I'm just going to play this how I want to play it and not worry too much about meta or what my friends are taking. And I think that's a much better way to build an army, because I think you're going to have more satisfaction playing it, even if you're not going to win as many games.
For me personally, I think it takes a special kind of player to be satisfied with building, painting, exhaustively creating an army, and being comfortable with the idea that it isn't going to win most games. I think that's, you definitely encounter those people, and I think that's obviously cool that they're really kind of happy with that sort of style of hobby and what they're kind of looking for. But I think even in the instances where you're doing like the narrative stuff, there's opportunities to add competitive elements. And I think as well with narrative games, certainly when I've created narrative armies, which hasn't happened too often, but it has happened in the past. I will use, for example, my old Khorne Demonkin list that I ran towards the end of 7th edition. That was entirely built around a theme and an idea of these Iron Warriors turned, Khorne demon worshipping loons that, rode into the battle off the back of a bunch of juggernauts and just got stuck in and started, really living up to the, expectations of the Khorne demonkin. And I think in many ways the army really kind of captured the essence of what it is to have a, that kind of list and that kind of idea. And to be fair, I'm always slightly hurt that the Khorne demonkin hasn't made a meaningful return yet in the 8th edition, because I really enjoyed playing demonkin up until the end of 7th. Obviously now they do have a demonkin sort of listing within Chaos Space Marines, but it's not quite the same as having a mixture of Chaos, Khorne demons and Space Marines and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think even then though, the core of that idea was to create something thematic, but also then seek to create opportunities to, live up to the expectations of it from a narrative perspective, but also then to exploit some of the more powerful units within the army and, give it a bit of a competitive edge. I mean, I know, Joe, when you were more invested in the narrative idea, you never really necessarily approached it from the perspective of, I'm happy with not performing well. You sort of believed that you were going to, buck trends and beat the odds, would you not say?
Oh yeah, it's always good to try and be the underdog, as it were. Yeah, so I decided to take Deathwatch to try and be, to toe the line of being thematic and run units like Deathwatch kill teams. I wanted to run dreadnoughts. I wanted to run a couple of tanks, but at the same time, I wanted to take these to tournaments and try and do well. So at the time, obviously, there was a lot of Yunari and stuff going on. So I wanted to deal with Eldar. So I took Sicarans because obviously they ignore negative modifiers to shoot at flyers, and also Deathwatch has that strategy and allow you to shoot at Eldar when they move within 12 inches. They got the fly keyword. And then I took a bunch of Mortis Dreadnoughts, which are really, really cool. And then all my Deathwatch kill teams obviously all had Storm Bolters and Storm Shields because they were the best options, and they still are the best options for them. So it was one of those, I want to run a pure army and I'll be limited by the amount of command points I can take, but I still wanted to do well with them. And then obviously to kind of keep it thematic and kind of toe that line of I'm still being hipsterish, I used loads of Forge World helmets and shoulder pads, and I took Forge World dreadnoughts and stuff. So I kind of put the extra level in instead of just taking a bunch of Terminator Storm Shields and Storm Bolters and then just chucking them on some basic tactical Marines. It's a weird one to kind of go on. Yeah, and it's I've always been one of those people that wants to do well, but I don't want to be a try-hard, and I want to run lists that are different to everyone else. But then after a while, like most people, when you write lists, you have to become, you've got to be honest with yourself, and you realistically got to say, what do I want to achieve? And I said to myself, I'm tired of coming mid-table on tournaments at the end. I want to start doing better. So then you have to have that conversation with yourself. What do I need to do? Well, in that case, I need to, for instance, for Imperium, if I'm taking Deathwatch, I'm going to have to chuck a Knight in there. I'm going to have to take Guard. And then that's when you start crossing the line, as it were.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really interesting for me, prior to about a year ago, I was definitely someone who really enjoyed and really worked hard to try and come up with new, creative, interesting ways of running my army lists. I've always really kind of peered into these books and tried to unearth really, janky combos and come up with really interesting opportunities or lists that I feel that, no one would necessarily see coming. And as a result of that, I have, created lists that have been, positively received or my biggest problem always seems to be that I come up with the ideas independent of anyone else, giving me the input, but only then discover that everyone else also kind of came up with the same ideas, which is obviously good because it means that we're all coming at it from a kind of creative standpoint in terms of the fact that we all kind of mutually agree on stuff that is the best. But at the same time, it's frustrating because, you know, you do end up looking like a bit of a me too, I also have the Elder Flyers thing. So, I mean, if I could use Elder Flyers as the example, I remember in January of this year, I was playing a game against Paulie, who appeared on the show a couple episodes ago, and we were playing at his club, which is just outside of Windsor, and we were doing a sort of tournament practice thing. He was running his Drakari, and I was running an Imperial soup list, so Blood Angels and Imperial Knights, just to try and mix it up, because, you know, my Elder list was performing quite well then. And I remember at the time, you know, we sort of were talking about it, and it became that real weird kind of like, you know, light switch moment where I realised that in Chapter Approved 2018, they had got rid of boots on the ground. Now, you know, obviously to say that now sounds relatively trivial because everyone knows that boots on the ground has changed because everyone's used to playing the Elder Flyer list. But back then, the Elder Flyer list hadn't become a thing yet, and no one had seen it. And I weaseled away, and I picked up the phone to Joe, and I said, "Joe, you'll never guess what, Joe! Oh my God, Joe, I've worked something out. It's incredible. It's gonna be so good." And I think at the time, Joe, you were relatively impressed with my sneaky Elder ways, were you not?
I was like, that sounds like an ingenious and yet cheesy thing.
Yeah.
But I was like, if it's gonna win you a tournament, then you might as well do it.
Well, exactly. Only then, it was funny, I was talking to Adam, who's also appeared on the show, and I said to him, I said, I've come up with an amazing list, mate, you're never going to believe it. And he said, "Is it 6 flyers?" And I went, "Yeah, it is, actually. How did you guess?" "It just won SoCal." And I was like, "Oh, brilliant." It was one of those ones you're like, great, cool, someone's already come up with it.
Yeah.
But, you know, look, anyway, regardless of that, I think there used to be a part of me that used to really enjoy that kind of process. And I guess, you know, when it comes to building something for a competitive event, I mean, Phil, yours is an interesting one, right? Because you're limited with what you can necessarily do, because without being unreasonable, you're a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to painting. So your churn rate or your willingness to go, whatever, I've got 2 more weeks till the tournament, I'm just going to bash out a whole army, that's not really your style, is it?
No, mine's very much a sort of long-term project where I tend to, at this rate, for my Krieg anyway, I'm adding like a handful of units a year. But then, you know, that varies because obviously in terms of pure Krieg, that's what I'm doing. But that's because I'm sort of, in the last year, diverted off slightly with some like Inquisition and some other stuff. But yeah, on the whole, it'll take me like a month or 2 to do like a unit or a model with lots of conversion work in. So I look at stuff from, I mean, I do look at things when it comes to my Krieg, because we do tournaments and go to the grand tournament and stuff. From a competitive standpoint, I'm like, what is my army missing that I feel like would be really good to add? And quite often it's, what models have I already bought that I haven't painted that are in this big backlog? Which one of those should I pick out and paint up and build? But sometimes I also look at it from a point of view of, I'd like to add a model that just looks really good because I'd like to win a painting award, or I'm trying to go for the best army award. So I'm like, what would be a bit more eye-catching for my army? Which is why I decided to add in some Inquisition to the army. It's like I've also got a bunch of knights to build and paint up at some point, because I think that would be a nice addition to that army, but at the same time it gives me the growth to create a completely separate army and run knights just on their own if I want, once I've built enough of them. But at the same time I can start small and just add one to my pre-existing army. And it's the same with the Minotaurs, you know, essentially if I want I can just build and paint one squad, and then I can immediately start playing with them as like allies as into my Krieg army if I want, and then I can slowly build up enough and paint them enough to the point where I've got them as a standalone army as well.
No, absolutely. I think this is probably a topic to revisit towards the end of the podcast, because the three of us present on this part of the show will be attending the Grand Tournament Finals in January. So I think it'd be really cool to kind of close out this segment with us sort of discussing our thought processes in terms of what we are going to be doing for that in relation to our list building. But I guess from the outset, I mean, obviously when you're looking at, and in my opinion, you're looking at something resembling competitive play, and you're looking at list building, I think obviously point number one is read the event pack. I mean, I'm sure Joe can reiterate this. Reading the event pack is pretty darn important, wouldn't you say so, Joe?
Oh god, yeah, it's super important, because the basics of the event packs would be like where it is, what time it is, what time the missions are, when lunch is, and how many points your army is. Like, it's like the basic, and then it'll be like how many detachments you're allowed, and then sometimes it'll throw in like what you can have and what you can't have. Some tournaments will put like a limitation on Forge World, which is something I didn't read an event pack. Turned up to a doubles tournament with 2 Zakarans in my army, and they're like, "We're not doing Forge World," and I was like, but luckily I had extra models with me that I could replace them with. And then sometimes it will tell you what missions are going to be played. So it'll actually be like game 1, it's narrow the search. Game 2, it's four pillars. And so going into it, you could be like, okay, these are the missions. These are the winning parameters of these missions. What army actually suits these missions best? So, like, for instance, if 4 pillars is in there, you're going to need troops in your army. So you're not going to run an entire dreadnought army or knights, for instance, kind of thing.
I mean, it's not to say that you wouldn't. It's just that if you're doing so, you accept that you're going to potentially have a match-up issue if you're in that kind of mission scenario, which will happen. So you can take a calculated risk, but yeah.
I went to a tournament and ran a pure knights list, knowing that the second mission was the relic. And I was like, I can't actually pick the relic up with this army, but I've painted this army and I want to use it. So my hope was, I just need to table my opponent, which inevitably I lost because my opponent got to the relic and then hid in the building where I couldn't assault him or shoot him.
Was that the one where, by some weird, stroke of luck, you ended up playing against someone where the table was essentially like a castle, which basically went around the relic, which your knights couldn't enter?
Yeah, so I couldn't actually get near it, and because they were doing the bottom floor blocks line of sight, the castle was actually raised off the ground, so I couldn't actually stand next to it and shoot down into it.
Your opponent must have absolutely been counting his blessings in that scennario. He must have been like, brilliant! I'll just do...
And at the time I was running a gallant, and luckily for me, he had loads of Razorbacks and Rhinos and tanks and stuff. So my gallant was running around killing these vehicles and then hurling them into the building to do mortal wounds. But it wasn't enough, because every time I mortal wounded a unit to death, another unit would just pick it up. It's like,
those pesky blighters. But yeah, I think reading the tournament pack is obviously the first and most important thing if you're going to play a competitive game. I think, all too often... I've experienced instances where people haven't fully read the tournament pack, and I felt relatively compelled to call them on certain issues. Me and Phil, most recently, when we did our doubles, we played against a duo that had not read the rule of 2, so they had 3 of a thing when they could only have a maximum of 2 as per the tournament pack, and obviously it felt a little bit egregious having to turn around to them and say, mate, your army isn't legal, but at the same time, their army wasn't legal. So, we were a bit of a... We did ponder it for a while, didn't we, Phil? We did think... But, yeah, in the end, we succumbed because, it was quite a tough-looking army, wasn't it? We thought, wow, one less blight crawler to worry about.
Yeah. Well, what we did do is we sort of just mentioned it to them, and they would be like, oh, what should we do about it? And then we were like, well, you should speak to the judge and see what they say, because it then kind of meant it was sort of out of our control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are remembering better than I.
And it wasn't like it wasn't like we calculatedly called them on it either. I was just asking from a technical point of view, are those guys 3 squads, or are they like one squad of 3 plague blast callers, or are they like 2 separate squads or whatever? And he was like, oh no, they're 3 individual ones. And then I was like, oh, but how can that be? Because of the war pack. And then that's where he was like, what? And then that's where it all kicked off from.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, but you should never feel bad about calling someone out for their rules pack. Or you should never feel bad for calling someone out for having an illegal army based on the rules pack. Because at the end of the day, it's like just like when you turn up and be like, oh, I bought 3 Warhound Titans, and it's like, well, how did you do that? The points don't even go that far.
Yeah.
Like, how is this going on? It's like, well, I wanted to just use them. It's just a tournament. It's like, no, it's illegal. You can't use it. It's not fair. It's like turning up to an exam and you've revised super hard, and you're going to work really hard on it, and you've done all this work, and then you turn over and see that someone's bought a notepad with all the answers, basically.
Absolutely. So. I think as well, obviously ITC differs massively from, chapter approved, and those are really the consistent things you're going to see these days. You're either going to play in an ETC style arrangement where it's a mixture of Maelstrom and Eternal from chapter approved with a few extra gubbins thrown in for good measure, or you're going to play ITC, which obviously is its entirely separate rule set with entirely different mission parameters. If you'd obviously like to discover more about ITC, go over to Frontline Gaming. They're the creators of all of that stuff, so they have much more intense and or thorough content about exactly what that is, but essentially it is the standard, or is aiming to become the standard competitive Warhammer 40,000 standard, I suppose. But yeah, and I think also the thing that people don't necessarily think about with list construction very well, certainly in competitive settings, is the points limitations that they're being presented with. If you're playing a 2,000 point tournament, there are elements to your army that can perform certain functions, and you can build things that hopefully will have a number of gimmicks or a number of tricks that will facilitate, dealing with variable outcomes. However, if you then start to kind of go lower to, say, 1,000 points, well, all of a sudden the nature of the game shifts and what you're dealing with shifts. And I think you also have to really think about points limitations as well. One of the exercises I do quite a lot when I write an army for an event is I think about or write army lists that I think can beat it, and then think of the likelihood that someone will have arrived at these conclusions based on mission packs. And I know that sounds a little bit sort of Rain Man and crazy, but, it's like back in 7th edition, or 6th edition, but specifically 7th edition, we always used to have the same conversation. What do you do about a Wraith Knight? Right? I mean, that was literally the ongoing conversation about list construction. Yeah, it sounds good. What's it do against a Wraith Knight? And then, if you didn't have an answer, your army was trash. Because if you don't have an answer to that question, then you're just going to lose. So that was always one of the most consistent things where we would have those kind of conversations. And that is true of 8th edition. It's like, okay, cool, this is what I'm taking. What do I think will beat it? What is the likelihood of that actually appearing based on these parameters? So if I wrote a flyer list, I have to start thinking, right, what are the weaknesses and what are the things I'm not considering, and is there something I'm missing? To give you an example, my Hornet army list that I was really excited to build for Grand Tournament Heat 2, as it transpired, really struggled against a Gene Stealer Rush army. The kind of Zerg style rush army where literally in turn 1 you're surrounded in Gene Stealers, and my army just didn't have enough fire output to manage that influx of bodies with 5-up invuns. That was a weakness I hadn't considered. It performs really good against lots and lots of top tier army lists, but I hadn't thought about someone running a bunch of screaming Gene Stealers that are going to be down my throat turn 1. And that's one of those things you've got to consider the variables. I mean, Joe, when you're approaching a tournament, what's your kind of process for sort of building the initial beginnings of a list?
So at the moment, I'm running my Celestial Lines. I'm running as Imperial Fist, which are quite good. But I think about what's popular now and what's doing well. We're going to take out the entire Space Marine meta because that's just an entire conversation on its own. So 2 months ago, I was like, well, what's really popular? Knights and Flyers. And it's one of those like, well, what can I put in my list that deals with both of those comfortably? Does my army have the tools to deal with those? Whilst like still kind of running to the theme that I want it to run to. So the best example to run was going into the last heat, and I was running I wanted to run a pure Dark Eldar army. So I took my core, which when you build your list, you kind of think like, what's the main things, and I build around it. So Dark Eldar, you run 3 Ravagers, all with disintegrator cannons. Then you take your Dark Heart Archon with his re-roll bubble of 1s, basically, and then you take a battalion with some stuff in Venoms. The Cavalite Warriors in Venoms with blasters to kind of deal with Knights and stuff. But then they're play testing it against things like Knights and tanks. I thought I could kill 1 at best a turn, but in return, those will absolutely destroy me. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll take out all the Venoms and I'll chuck in Harlequins, because Harlequins have Haywire blasters and they can drop a Knight quite comfortably. And then I playtested that and it did really well. And then I think, well, what have I got to deal with Eldar Flyers? So I had to play lots and lots of games with Eldar Flyers as that list. And I thought, well, it operates really, really well. And it does really, really well, but I'm not winning all the time. So then it becomes a system of just what new play styles do I need to learn, kind of thing. Because sometimes you get very comfortable in playing in a certain way with your army, and it will do really, really, really well 7 times out of 10. But when you want to start winning tournaments, you've got to think, well, what tactics aren't I utilizing that I need to be, kind of thing. And then you think like, well, maybe I could drop something, add something. And I think the main thing is just play lots and lots of games with your armies, basically. Yeah,
100%. One of the things that was interesting about what you said there, and I imagine Phil can probably elaborate on this with his guard side of things, you mentioned the core of your army, the mainstay units. I mean, arriving at that conclusion, so I mean, Phil, for your army, what is the mainstay of your army? What's the base that you always think, right, well, I've got to, come hell or high water, this is where I start? What's that look like for you, Phil?
It always used to be, for my Krieg, it used to be Venner plus, obviously you've got to have 2 HQs, so it'd probably be Venner plus a field officer plus 3 troops. Now that always varied between like the infantry squad and the grenadiers, but quite often I found the grenadiers a bit more expensive and they don't really give you a lot for their points. So it would quite often be just like 3 basic troop choices. Now that's actually changed since then, because I've sort of ended up dropping Venner because he's quite expensive for just giving you a bunch of extra orders. So if I have him in a list, that's great. But so the minimum, it's like I almost go for the minimum cost units that I can to fill in that battalion. So it's 2 field officers, which are like 30 odd points each or something, and then the 3 troops choices, which are 50 points each. And then you can build your army from there. And that's not technically what I always stick with, because actually things like tank commanders are so much more competitive now. So as an HQ choice, I'll be like, well, I'll take 2 of those if I can afford it. But I always like Lehman Russes. I've always had them in my army. So they're pretty much a solid staple in every army that I have. But now tank commanders went down in points like sometime earlier this year. So they've always been much more prevalent in my list. So I'll still maybe take 1 or 2 regular Lehman Russes, but I'll try and upgrade them into tank commanders where possible. But otherwise, the list kind of varies. So, sometimes I was a big fan of Death Riders, and then I wasn't, because I wasn't getting much out of them, and now I'm sort of coming around to them again. But knowing how they play, they can sort of add sort of core units, core ability to my army, as just being something to chuck up the board to be a threat. Because actually my army, I sort of look at what my army lacks, and it's like mobility, because it's quite a static army. It lacks psychic power, because they don't have access to psychers normally, which is why I end up sort of, one of the reasons why I went for Inquisition was because that gives you just that nice extra ability to cast some psychic powers or dispel some psychic powers. Things like they don't, inherently have deep strike capability. You can do it through like a relic to outflank, and like same with the Death Riders, they can outflank as well. But there's no ability to re-roll the charge rolls when you outflank. So is it worth that risk? And initially, I think a lot of people take the bait of going, I can deep strike something, and that means I can charge something. And it's actually not as good as you think it is, unless you have an ability to increase your charge roll, like give you +1 or 2, or give you a re-roll option. Because I think we worked out it's like a 1 in 3 chance of actually successfully charging. So unless you're just charging lots, it's not really worth it. So there's definitely a lot in my army where you've got to look at what are the flaws in your army, and how it's kind of inherent with the army faction in itself, because you don't have access to certain units or and abilities. So you've got to work out how you can kind of work around that as best as possible, either via like warlord traits and relics, or by taking allies, or you just kind of having to go, okay, right, so I'm the gunline army and that's my play style. And then if that's the case, you need to kind of play up to those strengths and not worry too much about your lack of mobility.
What's interesting as well that you call out the fact that you're prioritizing a battalion. And I think it's broadly established that within the modern game of 8th edition 40k, command points are by far and away one of the most important resources that you as a player need to ensure that you have an ample supply of. And I think a battalion is always the most cost-effective means of achieving that. Obviously, there's a certain level of taxation to that. But I do believe that, most people, at least in my experience, will begin building an army list by building out a battalion. Now, what tends to happen, in my experience, is that the troops element of the battalion is rarely called upon to be a heavy lifter within your army. They tend to be token gestures that are there for objective securing, but ultimately just to unlock that 5 CP. The HQ choices, the 2 HQ choices, other than in the instances such as, say, the Rusty 17, which is a term that refers to 3 units of Skitarii Rangers and 2 Tech Engineers or Engineer Tech Priest things, or the Loyal 32, which is 3 units of Guardsmen and 2 Commanders. Bar those instances where the Commander or HQ element is purely there as a kind of taxation thing, most people are going, okay, cool, my 2 HQ choices are going to be something really valuable, and then my troops are just going to be relative token gestures. So for a lot of people, if you're playing Space Marines, you're going, well, I've got to have, a Captain Smash, as they're belovedly called, and then he'll be joined by a chaplain or a librarian or someone of, equal requirement, or another Captain Smash, such as the flavor of the month. But then, who should join these jump pack thunderhammer wielding loons? Why, it's only 3 units of bolt gun scouts, because they're the cheapest thing that you can get in Space Marines, and that tends to be not thematically very interesting, but again, you've dropped the 165 points simply to unlock the CPs. And scouts still have value, and in most missions they're still scoring objectives, they're still tar pitting stuff, they're still getting in the way. But yeah, a lot of the time I always feel like, most people kind of start with that battalion and then start building out from there. At least I do. I mean, for me, it's always going to be a Farseer on jet bike, 3 units of Storm Guardians, which are the token, cheap, 48 points for 8 unit. And then the other HQ choice will depend on how I'm feeling at that particular time. It may be another Farseer, it may be an Incarn, it may be a Warlock Skyrunner. It really depends on, what is there. But again, equally, and then this is what you get from lots of gaming, and I think the emphasis, or the most sort of important thing to take away from this is definitely to consistently playtest and find what you believe or feel is the established kind of, baseline units. So, I mean, obviously, as Joe pointed out for his Drakari list, it's 3 Ravagers. Now, obviously, that's very different from the battalion structure, but, I mean, Joe, the logic with the 3 Ravagers is it's a reliable all-round damage unit, right?
Oh god, yes. So the Ravager of the Disintegrator basically puts out 9 strength 5 shots that are -3 AP and do a flat 2 damage. And with the Archon nearby, they get to reroll 1s to hit and wound. So as you can imagine, running 3 of those does a lot of work. But at the same time, I still put those in a battalion with... So my GT list had 4 squads of Cavalite Warriors in it. Originally, it's because they're only like 35 to 40 points a squad, and they're cheap, and they give me those 5 CP that I need. But very quickly, I learned that they are brilliant screening units. They're terrible in combat, but if you line up 20 of those guys, that's 40 splinter rifle shots they're putting out. So they'll thin out a horde. But also in 4 pillars, they can run out, and I put 2 on the objectives and then hide 2. And then once those 2 died, I'd send the reserve units out to hold. So I think after a while, you need to start learning that you need to get utility out of everything in your army. So it's like my Space Marine list now. I run a double battalion because that gets me maximum amount of points in my army. But the intercessors that I use, they're no slouch. I use all the sniper bolt rifles. Well, not the sniper, the heavy bolt rifles. So
the Stalker bolt rifle.
The Stalker bolt rifle, that's the one. So in Imperial Fist hands, every 6 to hit is 2 hits. Yes, they're only strength 4, but then because of the heavy doctrine, they become -3. Normally they're 2 damage, but if you're shooting at a vehicle, they get +1 damage with a heavy weapon. So the 6 squads of 5 guys that I'm running will tear through any light armor, and it keeps people's heads down. And then in the Space Marine matchup, they're still strength 4, -3, 2 damage. So they'll kill intercessors really, really happily all day, ignoring cover. So then that kind of switches from them being a unit I've just chucked in my army that is no use to being one of the core parts of my force. So that's why you got to kind of look at it.
I mean, as well with Phil's army, though, for example, with his Krieg, because Krieg have a spectacular ability, which is that they don't flee from wounds taken in the shooting phase or wounds caused by ranged weapons. And I do find that really helps Phil quite a lot in tournament settings where people will shoot 9 out of 10 guardsmen and he's got one there and they'll be like, it's alright, he'll run away. And Phil's like, no, he won't. He'll just stand there. And it's like, oh, bother. Which is, I mean, it's pretty useful, right, Phil?
Yeah, I remember when it first, when 8th edition first came out with that index, and I really didn't like it because it seemed to be very counterintuitive to the theme of the army. They're meant to be marching forwards, and sort of realistically, you're meant to be like charging into close combat, doing bayonet charges and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, they're great getting to combat because they can ignore the morale from the shooting phase. But then as soon as they get into combat, they sort of still just fall over like a wet blanket. So that always really bothered me. But then I sort of realised the competitive way of sort of playing it is actually just take lots of troops, because then you're maxing that ability out and then just keeping them on objectives, and you're not doing that kind of endless charge or march into the opponent's like territory. And that was partly almost like a historical hangover of how they played in 7th edition, where you had a special ability called Forlorn Hope, where you could place a custom objective marker in your enemy's territory, and you would get like 1 or 2 extra VPs if you had it, but then your opponent would get those VPs if you didn't have that objective. But it gave you the ability to recycle your infantry, so you could always bring a destroyed unit back onto your deployment edge. So there was that kind of whole concept in my mind that is how you play Krieg. But actually, the way the rule now works is actually, like I said, it's really good just having units that stick around, but you're not necessarily committing them to combat in the same way that you would think that they should play. And I guess there's that difference. It's the same with like orc players. Like, do you just charge wildly in characterfully into like your opponent, or do you strategically go, well, actually that one guy, if I don't do that and he's on this objective, I'll win the game. So actually he's going to not do what an orc would do, and he's going to hide in this building and stand on an objective. And there's that sort of difference of mindsets between when you play kind of competitively, which is kind of no hold bars, versus a maybe more narrative game where you are trying to get into the character of your army and sort of play it thematically, regardless of whether it will win you the mission or, but then there's always those moments where you'll be like, no, I'm just going to do this because, it might help me win. Yeah. So it's always a tricky decision when you're playing those kind of games. Yeah. But it also depends on like your opponent as well. If you're both going super narrative and you're going to have a good time no matter what, then you know you can get away with that kind of strategy.
And I think, again, to reiterate the point, I think a lot of what we take for granted in this building as experienced players is that experience, because we've played a lot of games, we've played in a lot of tournaments. Even Phil, who isn't, again, by his own admittance, a hardcore tournament player. And I think as a result of that, we've all kind of collectively had lots of conversations and had lots of, discussions around what is the most compelling or competitive opportunity for our armies, but we've also gained our own experiences throughout. And I think it's important. I think, as Joe said, everything in your army needs to fulfill a function. And whatever that function happens to be, you need to tune things and build things in such a way as you're delivering the best possible opportunity for those things to achieve that outcome. And I think, my feeling always is, I'm not a fan of big combos. Like, when you start talking about, and a lot of people do this, for example, let's talk about the Chain Lord. I mean, has either of you seen a Chain Lord since it came out?
One of my friends ran them for a bit, but he gave up because they're very CP intensive.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't aware with the term Chain Lord, so a Chain Lord is a Chaos Lord with a chainsword, a jump pack, 2 chainswords in fact, and essentially one of the chainswords becomes a relic chainsword, which essentially does mortal wounds if you roll, what is it, an unmodified 6 or just a 5+ or a 4+?
I think it's just if you to wound roll of the 6, because there are ways of amping that up to ridiculous numbers.
Yeah. And then essentially you take that relic, which you get from running Black Legion, then you take a Dark Apostle, which buffs him, then you take a Sorcerer that buffs him, then you take him on a Juggernaut, which buffs him, or put him in a jump pack or something or other. And basically it's one of these ridiculous kind of, to use a term from a completely different game system, It's like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Exodia combo, where if you get all 5 pieces of this Exodia, which essentially means you draw 5 separate cards in a game where you've got a deck of cards that's about probably 100 thick. But if you draw 5 cards at random, you automatically win the game. And anyone who understands Yu-Gi-Oh! Will tell you that strategy never works for anybody because you never pull it off. The same is true of things like Chain Lords and things of that nature. You only need one piece of the puzzle to be missing, and then all of a sudden those elements kind of fall away. And don't get me wrong, there are combinations that work quite comfortably, things that can perform well. But yeah, I would also really recommend, for the majority of people looking to break into tournament gameplay or looking to build more compelling competitive army lists, that you try and shy away from heavy combo-based units. Once someone needs more than 3 things, in fact, once they need more than 2 things to be competitive, it is not worth taking, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know, Joe, what do you think in that regard? I mean, have you ever signed on to that madness?
I have signed on to the madness, as you say, and like you learn very quickly that you can spend all of your command points in like before the first turn's even over. Like you mentioned, the Captain Smash, the Thunderhammer Captain. So you take him as standard with your Thunderhammer, the Thunderhammer, normally a Storm Shield, jump pack. Then you spend 1 CP to make him a member of the Death Company. And when you eventually deep strike him down, you've got to spend another 2 command points to give him the 3d6 inch charge.
Which you don't necessarily have to do, though, because you give him the Angel's Wing Relic, which means he rerolls charges anyway.
Which gives he rerolls charges, so it's still a 2d6 charge. But if you roll a 6 and a 1, you're like you'll inevitably end up spending the one more CP for him to get to reroll that 1 to 2. And then once he hits combat, you pay another CP to give him like additional T3 attacks. And if you roll a 1, you might spend another command point to re-roll that 1. And so you're at 4 CP. And then he hits on 3s, re-rolling 1. So you might roll a 2 or something. So you end up like so, but you can't re-roll those anyway. So he's done all of his attacks, and you're like, oh, I've already spent 4 command points of the 5 from the battalion that I bought him with, and that's without looking at maybe you've done the Death Company thing where you get to move other units forward. I think when you look at putting units in your army, you go, how many command points does it cost me to do this? And then look at this unit, what happens to it when I've run out of command points? What is its function? Can it live on its own? If I have this unit here and it requires a captain, a lieutenant, a chaplain, and an apothecary, 4 characters to babysit it, like, what am I getting out of that unit from having 4 other characters, which is basically 200 points invested on top?
Probably closer to 300 for the 4 you
300,
just listed.
Yeah. So once they're all gone, like, does this unit even do anything? Is it still reliable?
I think there are things, though, so those 4 characters, which essentially make up the bedrock of any good Marine army, right? I mean, not necessarily the Apothecary. I think the Apothecary is 50-50, but, you know, a captain, a lieutenant, and a chaplain now are pretty much the no-brainer, must-go in my Space Marine army list idea, but mainly because they amplify, certainly the lieutenant and the captain, everything around them. And again, it was interesting to use Captain Smash as an example, certainly Blood Angel's Captain Smash, because I know he's quite CP heavy, but the CPs are done... This is the thing with him, is that he is on his own, though. He still isn't with anything else, and I think that's the thing. Okay, you've had to put a Warlord trait on him and a really good relic on him, and you've got to make him Dev Company, which is 1 CP, and you're either going to use TCP to make him move before the first battle round, or you're going to leave him in Deep Strike, or you're going to use the thing that has him deploy with using Deep Strike, or rather using the thing that means he, is deployed within 9 inches of the enemy. The point is, he's CP heavy, but he is self-reliant. You're not necessarily needing to go, and now I use a chaplain on him, and now I use a librarian on him, and now I use this on him. Now, don't get me wrong, you can do that, and it amplifies him even further, but that's more icing on the cake than an essential. Something like the Chain Lord, which again, people were going, it could do 100 mortal wounds. It's like, well, yeah, it can, although it couldn't do 100, literally. I think it did, topped out at 30 or something like that. Yeah. But regardless of that nonsense, the point is in order to make a Chain Lord work, you had, as Joe has said, maybe 300 points of other stuff that was only there to buff one thing. And again, the Chain Lord fell off a cliff when the Assassin Index came out in White Dwarf, and the Vindicare went, sorry, what, mate? And then it's dead. And it's like, okay, that, and don't get me wrong, the Chain Lord was not an expensive investment on his own, but now you've got 3 dudes kicking around who were only really there to make him better, and now they're just going, I don't quite know what to do anymore, and then it just becomes a little bit of a false economy. So, yeah, I think consistently try and avoid really, really over-the-top combos. Try and make sure that every part of your army serves a purpose. Consider the points that you're playing at. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Smaller point tournaments. I know Warhammer World either recently ran or is about to run a 1-dayer tournament, which they seek to, utilise as a more entry-level event for people who maybe haven't gone to tournaments before. If you're running in a 1,000-point event, you really just need to sort of pick one thing and do it well. You're either going to go in there and smash into people, or you're going to sit there and try and soak up the damage. So I think don't try and build an army that's too varied for 1,000 points in a tournament setting. Just try and fixate yourself on one outcome and build the army the best way you can to achieve that. And then, beyond that, obviously read the mission pack, because, the mission pack really is the quintessential thing that lets you win the event. I have struggled in tournaments where I haven't won games because I haven't read the event pack properly. I'm sure Joe and Phil will tell you the same. I mean, Phil, it's been less of a problem for you probably because you've mostly done Warhammer World Events with us, isn't it? But every now and again it rears its head.
Oh, for sure. I always try and make the effort to read the event pack. What I do less of is practice the missions or deliberately... I'll try and read what the missions are. I think the Gibraltar No Retreat event, that was in the back of my mind, but I wasn't too concerned about it because I kind of knew what I wanted from my army more from a thematic level rather than just worrying too much about trying to tick off every mission, because that one is more like the ETC style where it's Maelstrom and Eternal War sort of played together. So there's a lot more variables involved, so you can't try and game the missions per se. But it's always worth checking the event pack just on how the missions are, because like I said, if there's one where you need troops, you kind of need to make sure you're going to take some troops with you to make sure you can get the job done.
100%. So we said we were going to talk about it, so we may as well do that now. Let's talk about the Grand Tournament Finals and the army lists that we're considering and the thought process that's gone into our list construction up to this point. I know Phil hasn't actually really settled on anything now, but it'd be good to hear what his kind of thought process is. But seeing as he just spoke last, and obviously I'm speaking in the middle, let's start with Joe. What are you thinking of doing for the GT Finals, Joe? Talk us through the process of your list construction.
So, as I mentioned, I'm taking my Celestial Lions, and I'm running them as Imperial Fists. So,
will they be Celestial Lions with the Imperial Fist chapter tactics, or will they actually be Imperial Fists that happen to look like Celestial Lions?
The second one.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you do that, though?
As of the event pack, you can, yes.
Sure. I thought the event pack said you couldn't.
Yeah,
so you could take them as a successor chapter, but you can't play them as Imperial Fists.
And this is the event pack fun, everybody. This is how this goes. But you can. The only area where you're going to get when it's going to get sticky for you, mate, is potentially on Siegebreaker, because Siegebreaker is an Imperial Fist only thing. So even though you've got the Imperial Fist chapter tactic and you are a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, you are not the Imperial Fists. Again, I'd probably seek clarity with the organisers if it's your intent to use Siegebreaker. But anyway, spoilers. Let's just assume everything's fine and we didn't have this conversation.
Let's just assume that I'm just running an Imperial Fist army.
Yes.
So, I'm basically, I've looked at the army and I've gone, I'm just going to run them to their best efficiency. So, the entire army are a few things is bolt guns or bolter weapons, because that's where their strength is when you're rolling out all those shots. Any 6s to hit then become 2 hits, which, as you can imagine, is incredible. It's great for the rapid fire bolt guns on the intercessors, because you make them rapid fire 2. So 10-man squads putting out 40 shots, and each 6 is making more. And then, because I've got a chapter master nearby, I re-roll the 1s and 2s, and that gives me more chances for 6s. And then the other Imperial Fist ability for running them in the heavy doctrine is that heavy weapons get +1 damage. So I'm just running lots of heavy bolters, because they all of a sudden become it's heavy. You get +1 damage when shooting at vehicles. So those heavy bolters become damage 2 versus any vehicles, which is great. Like I said, I'm using the Stalker bolt rifle, which then become damage 3 versus vehicles, which is great. So I've basically created the core of my army. So I've taken double battalion. One battalion's basically got everything in it. So my lieutenant, 3 squads of intercessors, 2 squads of 5 centurions with bolters and heavy bolters, and I've got a company ancient in there, and I've also got
a company ancient or a Primaris ancient.
A Primaris ancient,
yes,
and a Thunderfire cannon, and he's in there to deal with obviously units that are out of line of sight. Most artillery pieces that hide out of line of sight have the vehicle keyword, which means that he becomes damage 2 when shooting at those vehicles, stuff hiding out of line of sight. But he's also good against the horde armies, because you can half their move, advance, and charges, which is great. So he helps to slow my opponents down. And then my second battalion is just my kind of chaff one to give me the extra points, which has just got another captain, a chaplain in it to boost my centurions, and then a unit of intercessors and 2 units of infiltrators.
So am I to assume from this, Joe, that your army is very reliant on command points?
It's not massively reliant on command points. So to give my centurions in the Siegebreaker cohort for 1 CP, one of those when shooting against a vehicle on a 6 to wound is a mortal wound in addition. But they're mainly there for the command points are mainly there to make one of my captains a chapter master. And then I've got another one which gives an additional relic. And then at the start of the game, I can pick a unit that's in cover and amp their cover save. So they get +2 to their cover save instead of +1. So a lot of those points go on to pre-game. And after that, I tend to save them mainly for re-rolls. But that's about it. Because most of my army are all very self-sufficient. And I'll save some re-rolls for like the chaplain, because the chaplain cause obviously he adds +1 to wound when for another unit that's shooting. So you chuck those on a unit of centurions or a unit of stalker bolt rifle guys who want to deal with other pesky space marines kind of stuff. So
that sounds very good, mate. A solid selection. So you've basically gone with the idea of, like you say, you're seeking for those efficiencies and those combos. Because what I like about the list, as is often the case with Marines, is that you've obviously built that really solid core HQ section, and then kind of obviously built everything out from there. I mean, are you in the habit of kind of trying to create, I suppose, like battle plans alongside these list constructions that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, like, I've got one captain who's my chapter master, and he's with with the lieutenant and the chaplain, and they have their bubble because that's what Space Marines do. So you have your centurions, and you have a couple units of intercessors. But the other captain, who I give another relic to, is the Eye of Hypnoth or something. It's an Imperial Fist relic, which basically gives him the lieutenant ability as well. So he reroll 1s to hit and wound for units within 6. So it means that he can go with another blob, and they can work self-sufficiently. Because I found a lot of the time with Space Marines is that you pick an area, you blob up, and you don't move, and you blow your enemy off the table. But if you against a very fast-moving, efficient army that can hide, and lots of small units that can kind of keep out of the way of your shooting, then your army can really start to lose out on what it does best. But by having a second, more mobile force to kind of go around and hunt out that stuff, or go and take the middle of the table to cause issues, then I think that gives me a bit more advantage over other Space Marine armies.
No, it makes total sense, man. I mean, again, it's a solid list construction, a solid set of principles to it all, really. I think, it sounds like you got a really good kind of core. I think, again, if I was to sort of describe your army, it's definitely very much that kind of anvil approach, isn't it? You're a pretty tough, relatively immobile force, though, right?
Oh god, yeah. So at its core, it's a gunline army, and that's what it is, and that's what it does. But there are, when writing the list, I've gone there are obvious downsides to running a gunline army. You're not mobile. You can be wrapped easily. You can't go out and capture objectives. If you've got annoying backline, for instance, if my Thunderfire gets taken out, then I've got nothing to deal with stuff in the backfield. So that's what the second force is there to deal with. And that's what the infiltrators are there to deal with. Things like, so I thought so not many people run them anymore. The Gene Stealer cult, a few months ago, was terrifying because they just drop in, charge you turn 1, and you're dead. So I was like, that's why the infiltrators are in there. They're also to deal with demon armies, with the bloodletter bombs, stuff like that. So by putting those out on the table, they can control where my opponent comes in, stuff like that. So I've tried to think what every unit in my army can do for the points that I've got.
That makes a lot of sense, mate. And I think, I'm going to be interested to see how that performs. I mean, to the best of our understanding, even though we're assuming that Chapter Approved 2019 will obviously be available by the time of the final, I think we're all under the impression they're going to stick to the 2018 Chapter Approved just to have consistency, but then we don't know, do we? I mean, we'll find out nearer the time. I mean, that's definitely one of the interesting elements for us from list construction for the final, because we don't know exactly what missions will be played just yet. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, so Phil, what do you reckon? What's your approach? What's your thought process at this moment in time? What do you think you're going to face? How are you going to deal with it? What you when given the task of thinking, crikey, there's a tournament in 2 weeks and I haven't written my army list yet. How does the thought process begin? What's the method?
Well, normally You're right. I tend not to finalise the list until about a few weeks beforehand. But I'm always thinking about it and trying to work out what I can do. Normally, I've got a rough idea, and it's like I know what big things I'm going to take. I know what stuff I need to paint for it. But sometimes there's that kind of small optimizations where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll swap out this for something that's a bit better for the points, or like war gear, for example. For this one, though, my original feeling, and it's like I've not written a list at all yet. It's more take what I took to the last GT and try and optimize it a bit more. So, my assumption was, and I don't know if it still necessarily is going to be the case, that there'll still be a lot of Marines around. But I guess post-SoCal, that maybe Marines won't be that kind of meta-breaking thing that everyone was expecting it to be. I still think they're going to do well, so I still think we'll see a lot of people take them. So my original aim was to, how can I make my army better at killing Marines? So I guess I'm going for a kind of anti-meta list where I'm trying to take something that will deal with what I assume will be the meta, and that's what the majority of people will be taking. So it's like, my army has sort of lots of Lehman Russes. So, a battle cannon's really good because it does D3 damage. A Punisher, not so good because it only does 1 damage. And the other sort of weak point in my army I found, and this is basically reviewing how I did at the GT, it's like the games I lost were the ones where my Shadow Sword wasn't really doing much against my opponents. And I think that could just be a bit of a coincidence. So when I go up against like Elder or Dark Elder, for example, it's like Shadow Sword doesn't really have some rich targets that it can easily kill, because everything, like, for example, has invuln saves, or there's just not a lot of vehicles for me to kill. So I'm like, okay, should I swap that out for something like a Baneblade, which does like, I think it's like 3d6 shots, strength 8, sort of -2 or 3, because I think it's pretty much a battle cannon, but it does flat 3 damage. So that kind of volume of shots still makes it really good at killing vehicles, that because of that flat 3, and it's same with the Relic Battle Cannon. That's really amazing because of the flat 3. Like, that consistency is really good.
That Basilisk Cannon will delete things like Salamander Aggressors, which are going to be very popular.
But it still gives you that kind of the ability to also deal with hordes or lots of units. So if there's no vehicle to target, then I can use that battle cannon on, worst case scenario, a bunch of plague bearers, and it's still going to, or poxwalkers or whatever, it's still going to deal with them, because that number of shots should allow you to deal with kind of a bit more of a horde infantry army. Plus the fact that the Demolishers changed in the Imperial Guard FAQ, so it now does a flat D6 shots rather than only D6 above like 5 or more infantry. That's really good. So that's definitely a viable option. I've been thinking about other units that I might want to build and paint that will kind of do a similar thing, but maybe in a slightly more optimized way. So there's the Colossus Bombard, which I bought like probably about a year ago, and I've wanted for a few years. So that's like an artillery piece. It looks a bit like a Lehman Russ, with a big cannon on the back. So it ignores line of sight. The range is 120 inches, which is ridiculous. It's strength 6. I think it's D6 shots. And it's like -2 2 damage, but it also ignores cover as well. So that makes it really good Primaris Marine killing unit. It's got a really long range, so it can hit anything on the board, no matter where it is. The ignoring line of sight is great against the terrain rules that are in place at Warhammer World, because they now use the bottom of ruins now block line of sight. And although saying that, it wasn't too much of a problem in my games in the last tournament, because there's just not a huge amount of terrain, and not every table has ruins on it. Quite often you just find you've got a sea of woods, like the old style Citadel woods. So is it worth taking those models for that 1 or 2 tables that you might be on? It's definitely the more optimized way of doing it. but the fact that they can't shoot twice means that a standard Lehman Russ is probably going to be more efficient overall. But it does fill that target, that niche of I need to be able to shoot stuff out of line of sight. So that's one option. The other one was a Macarius Vulcan, which again I've had sort of sat in my big pile of shame to do for a while. And the fact is that shoots, I think it shoots 15 shots, but if it doesn't move, it can shoot twice. I can't remember if it has to be at the same target or not, because that might be a bit of a stickler if it has to be. I think it can just shoot twice, so that gives you a bit more optimization if that is the case, because otherwise it's the same with the Punisher. The Punisher can shoot 40 shots, but it has to be the same unit, which quite often means you've already killed it in the first volley, you're just wasting those shots. Whereas if the Vulcan can shoot at different targets, like, it makes it a bit more optimized, but it's also, I think it's like strength 6 -2 damage. So again, that would be really good at killing Marines. And it used to be quite popular, I think, with, Krieg players on the tournament scene, like around the world, but I haven't seen it around for a while. And I don't know if it's just fallen out of favour, but it always seemed to be like one of those units that people would say, oh yeah, it's really good, like, take it. But I've just never got around to doing it. So that's my other option for like a big unit to take, swapping out Shadow Sword for something else.
So broadly speaking, you're expecting a Space Marine heavy meta, and you're coming up with lots of ideas of how to tackle that problem.
Yeah, I mean, you tell me if you think I'm going off on a weird tangent, because that was my assumption post Space Marine Codex and post Iron Hands. I don't know if that's still going to be the case by the time the tournament comes around, and I think potentially the chapter approved might shake things up, but then they might actually turn around and go chapter approved because it's so close to the tournament deadline, because it's a month out. They might go, oh, we'll just ignore chapter approved, which is, they have a habit of doing that. So yeah, what do you think? Do you think there'll be lots of Space Marines?
It's difficult to say at this stage. I think people are, as often is the case with these situations, are starting to crack the code that is, new army list syndrome, and people are starting to realise that there are options that allow people to comfortably tackle things like Space Marines. So I think, having seen Tau perform quite strongly recently, I think it's very likely that people will start kind of trying to need to solve that puzzle again. Because one of the things about Tau that was really interesting was that obviously Tau had some weak matchups in the old kind of tournament meta, such as Elder Flyers, although they did relatively well against them, but when played by a really strong player, they definitely had a much more 50-50 matchup. They definitely struggled against other sort of types of armies that don't initially come to mind, but I know there were some, it was tough for Tau players to make it, for all Tau players to make it all the way to the end. But I think one of the armies that they continue to be very strong against is Marines, and especially because they tend to out-gunline Marine gunlines, and, a big part of the Marine meta has been those type of things, because you go, look, I've got my Repulsor Executioner, and I'm going to shoot at your Riptide, and it's cool. It's like, what's that big gun you got there? Oh, it's going to do hundreds of damage. It's like, no, did one mortal wound to a drone. It's like, great. And certainly in ITC format as well, Tau are really, really strong. And I think it's one of the interesting things about the Grand Tournament finals is that we're still using, proper 40k, if you will, which is, rulebook and chapter approved 40k. And in rulebook and chapter approved 40k, Tau don't tend to be quite as strong as they are in ITC, because they struggle to exploit certain, rules that have enabled them to be as strong as they are. For example, if you come up against Tau at Warhammer World, the army list that or one of the strengths to the army list, in ITC is the fact that you can put drones behind a ruin, and the generic ITC ruling on bottom floor of ruins is that they block line of sight. That's their generic ruling. Now at Warhammer World, that ruling only applies to the City of Death ruins, and the Cities of Death ruins are not everywhere on every board. So if you're on a Sector Mechanicus or Sector Imperialis piece of terrain, and you can draw a line of sight to that drone that's behind the wall of a Sector Imperialis or Sector Mechanicus or Woods or whatever it happens to be, you're still within the tournament pack of Warhammer World Events and allowed to shoot at that. And as soon as you're allowed to shoot at the drones, they lose a lot of their functionality, because the thing about the drone that makes them really strong in the ITC format doesn't necessarily translate over to Warhammer World because of the way their tables are laid out and every other thing that comes into effect. So I do think the Marines will perform stronger against the Tau, but then I do think the performance of the Tau in ITC will filter down into certain people believing that, this is the key to defeating Marines within the confines of the GT finals. And that's the interesting thing, because a lot of people's decisions are informed by a completely different rule set to what they're going to play. And this is why, when it comes to the very first point, or one of the early points we raised, which is really pay attention to what you're playing. So yeah, look, I mean, long story short, we'll see a lot of Marines. Of course we will. Do I think Marines will win? No, I don't think Marines will win. I think Marines, most people have got got Marines figured out, and I think Marines will probably be very heavily featured between positions 2 and 30, but I don't think they'll come up on top because of certain other traditional lists still performing quite well against them. But at the same time, Phil, I think you're right to prepare for them, because they're going to be everywhere. You know, whether or not they're going to win it is irrelevant. You've still got to be able to beat them. So yeah, I think you're correct to plan for them, because they'll be everywhere.
Yeah.
And I guess if I can be self-indulgent and talk about my own methodology, so I have to admit I was very, very, very tempted to jump ship and use my Space Marine collection for the GT final. But I didn't want to come across and appear, and this is, always an interesting stance to take as a guy who's been using Elder Flyers for the last year. But I didn't want to appear like one of those guys who, was just chasing the meta and trying to, abandon army lists that they're comfortable playing just because, things have changed and Space Marines are as strong as they are. So I'm sticking with Craft World Elder. I will be adding a Ynnari element to that with the Incarn. But the logic of my army and what I'm trying to do at the moment is I'm working really hard by playing Joe and other strong Space Marine players, or talking to strong Space Marine players to try and understand the makeup of the Marine army, because I know that that's going to still remain a very strong contender. And I'm trying to come up with methodologies and ideas that allow me to tackle those. And I think at the moment I've settled on, going back to a big unit of Shining Spears, scatter bikes and things of this nature. I'm not planning on taking more than 3 flyers. And for those who listen to the podcast regularly, you'll be shocked to hear there's no Hemlocks in my current army list plan. And a lot of that is because of the fact that I think, again, the thing is with the Hemlock that really struggles in the Marine matchup is that if you throw a Hemlock forwards, which you have to do in order for it to be effective, you lose a lot of the advantages of the Elder Flyer. So I think the Crimson Hunter Exarch has the edge because you're able to, keep range and keep far away and maintain that -2 debuff to their shooting, which is super important in this matchup. One of the things I've learned from playing Joe most recently is you just don't want to get involved in trying to grind out a game against Space Marines. Space Marines cannot be ground down anymore. So you have to be a tricky person in order to come up on top, especially when you're playing Elder. So the idea of the list is that, again, from the construction standpoint, I started with the expectation that I wanted to get a good amount of CP because I require a decent amount of CP. So I started with the battalion, and the battalion was made up of cheap troop choices in the form of Storm Guardians, and then I invested in Farseer and Warlock because they are essentially the backbone of the Elder. And the reason they're the backbone of the Elder army is because they have so many buffs and abilities that amplify the list. Then I took 3 Crimson Hunter Exarchs and an Air Wing detachment, which brings up my total CP to 6. This essentially is again a really strong element of the list because it's Elder Flyers, and as hopefully people are already aware up to this point, Elder Flyers are very strong. And then in terms of an additional detachment, I'm now also exploiting and looking into the ability to use custom craft worlds and what that can add to things and how they can compensate for other weaknesses, and really starting to kind of think about how that works. And again, I've taken a Supreme Command detachment, I'm taking a Farseer and another Warlock, and an Incarn in the Supreme Command detachment. I'm also taking a big unit of Shining Spears and a big unit of Scatterbikes, and they're going into the thing. And the idea of this list and what I'm working on at the moment is I hurl the Shining Spears at you completely and utterly blasé, like I just kind of load them up with spells. And again, this kind of contradicts what I was saying before about overly buffing things, but I do throw a lot of spells at them, but really the only thing that really matters is if I cast Quicken on them, because Quicken is the ability that allows me to double move. So I've taken steps to ensure that Quicken will definitely happen. To put it in context, I've given Quicken to a Warlock, who is my Warlord, and he has a Warlord trait that allows him to re-roll his Psychic test. I've also made him part of a custom craft world where his 1s count as 2s, so even if I rolled a double 1, he would get a 4. And I've also made sure that in his detachment is a Warlock of the same custom craft world, so as I can use the Seer Council ability to add an additional +1. So if I add the +1 for the Seer Council and I add the 2 2s for a double 1, if I rolled a double 1, I would still get a 5. Which makes it incredibly likely that I'm going to get Quicken to happen because it's only warp charge 6 or 7. So I just need one of those dice to be a 3, and I'm home free. But or maybe not 3, maybe a 4. But point is that's the kind of idea of it, and I'm spending a lot of time working on the construction list. I know I need a lot of CP, so I prioritised the battalion. I knew I needed pressure, so I looked at the Shining Spears, and I'm really working on trying to keep that pressure applied, because the idea of the army list is Shining Spears go forwards, they get in a fight early doors, they endure for the first battle round, and then they die at some point in the second battle round, which then opens up the opportunity for the Incarn to appear and then start wading into the core of people's armies. And while this is going on, the Storm Guardians are running around going, "Ooh, we control this objective," and the Farseers are running around going, and you're buffed. And then the Scatterbikes are shooting at stuff and really kind of causing aggravation, and the Flyers are just chipping away at big targets. So that's the broad idea of it. And the way I arrived at that is around the idea of, again, still trying to maintain an all-rounder list, still trying to build a list that will work well within the event format, but also trying to solve the puzzle that is all the other things. But, I mean, again, who knows what could happen when the new Chaos Space Marine stuff comes around, right? I mean, it's all exciting times ahead when it comes to the meta. It's anyone's guess what could occur.
Yeah, because there's at least a few the Psychic Awakenings that are probably going to come out. So there's the Chaos one with Black Templars, and I guess that's going to come out November. It'd be interesting though if we see another one in December, because Christmas time, most of the Christmas releases tend to be out around November, sort of early December. So actually, a lot of December just tends to, I mean, I'm sure there are a few releases, but they're kind of minor ones, or there's nothing really kind of between Christmas and New Year's. And then you might see something sort of January, but by then it's probably too late to be applicable for the event. I don't know, actually, they do it up to a week, don't they?
Yeah, so it's the week before it'll be in effect. But they do tend to actually time these things, at least, whether on purpose, who knows, but they do seem to have these things happen the weekend of a big launch of something. So when the Space Marine book came out, that was the weekend that we were there playing in Heat 2. So, these things weren't allowed to take root, as it were.
I think the thing that's going to potentially affect my army the most is the Inquisition rules in White Dwarf, which is coming in December. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that is, and if I can then add that into my army. But again, because I've sort of mentioned before, depending on what order this comes in, the event pack has a thing about base sizes and not being able to, they're kind of strict on conversions now. So whether I can actually even take my Inquisition and my Crusaders, because they're all converted and all slightly different base sizes from the official models. I don't know if for this one they'd be like, yeah, it's okay because this is the old event rather than the new style grand tournaments that are happening next year, or if that will still be the case. Yeah, so I don't know. I've got to ask them about all my converted stuff to see if I'm even allowed to take it to the GT. Because if I can't, that'd be really disappointing. Because that's sort of it's pretty much those models the reason why I even got into the final in terms of qualifying, in terms of like favourite votes and stuff. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see.
Indeed. Final thoughts, Joe, on the entire topic. What would you summarise?
Basically,
I love when I put you on the spot like this and you get all confused.
Once you've got your list sorted and you've kind of figured out what you want to do, from then on it's just about repetition. It's just playing as many games as you can and going into the tournament knowing everything that your army can do. I tended, like I've said, like in the past, I've tended to reach mid-level with the tournaments and stuff with my armies. And before that, I was playing maybe one game a month at best, sometimes one every 2 months. And then, but if you're having that length of time in between your events, a lot can change. Like you can change your mind on units, new armies can come out, stuff like that. Whereas for my training for Heat 3 that we went to, where I came 10th, I played 1 to 2 games a week for 14 weeks. Just like I picked an army, played that non-stop for a month, and then I was like, okay, this is where it is. This is what I need to change. And then I played that 1 to 2 times a week for 4 weeks, and then I just kept going like that and just playing up until the tournament where when I went there I knew everything I could possibly know about my army. So that's my piece of advice. Once you've got to level what you know you want to play, just play with it.
There you go. Read the tournament pack, think about what you're taking and what your objectives are and what you're trying to achieve, i.e. do you need lots of CPs, do you want to prioritise certain types of units, what kind of aggression and themes you're going to try to achieve. Playtest the ever-living crap out of it, because as Joe has attested to, that is the most important thing that you can do. And then ultimately it's about, setting realistic personal objectives. And we didn't talk about this throughout the course of this segment, but I feel like we've gone on long enough now and we probably need to conclude. But yeah, ultimately set yourself some realistic goals, learn from your mistakes, learn from your victories, learn from your losses, and continue to develop your playstyle and understanding of armies that you will encounter, as well as the ones that you are playing yourself. Because the people who win games at 40k know as much about the thing that is across the board from them as the thing that they are playing themselves, and that is one of the most important elements as well as anything else. But there you go, guys. We hope you've enjoyed us prattling on about what we do when we think about building lists and stuff. We will transition now to whatever it is that comes next. Thank you very much. Woo! Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes episode 33 of the Lookout Sir 40k podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the collective works of myself, Phil and/or Joe, and Richie as well. Let's not discount him, although he isn't here recording with us right now. He's here in spirit, as he continues to be. Not to say that he's dead. That would be a little bit ridiculous. Unless, of course, he is dead, in which case this is going to be acting as a really, really horrifying premonition. So let's hope that hasn't come to pass. Don't you reckon so, Joe?
We could. He'll be doing a Mayor West from Family Guy on us.
Is that what he's doing? Is that why he's hiding in his office?
Yeah. Well, something I discovered today. The last words that Adam West said on Family Guy was at a funeral, and he was just stood there and was doing his usual talking. He's like, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm already dead. And then he just disappeared as a ghost. Obviously, he was still alive then, and he didn't know he was going to die. But he died after that.
I mean, it's not reasonable to assert that he didn't know he was going to die. I think we all know that's coming for all of us, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't know that he would be dead at the time where that aired, I suppose.
Yeah.
But then who would have thought, right? I mean, for all I know, I could drive into work tomorrow, put this up online tonight, and then, go to work tomorrow, and I could be dead by the time this thing comes out. Anything's possible.
Could I have your new gaming table if you do?
I suppose you could, really. Actually, God, we didn't talk about that. That was something I was supposed to talk about. I got my new gaming table. I'm going to put some photos of it up on Instagram so as you can see it. So if you go to my Instagram, which will be in the description below, you can see my new gaming table. It was supplied by Natural 20 Gaming Tables. They're a lovely bunch of lads working out of a really cool, what's the word for it? Workshop. Working out a really cool workshop in Nottingham. So they're based in Nottingham. The guy Dan, another Dan that I dealt with, was a really stand-up guy, did a really great job, was very, very on top of everything, and did an excellent job of delivering the table. It's come, and it's to a really high standard. And, me and Joe played a game on it the other day, and you would agree, right, Joe? It elevates the gaming experience, wouldn't you say?
It's a work of art, if anything. The best way to describe it is beautiful. And the good thing is, because it's got a very high raised outer side, dice aren't flying all over the place as well. It's quite nice.
It is pretty fantastic. I mean, me and Phil will be playing a game on it not too long from now, right, Phil? Oh, he's gone again.
Up again. Oh.
Sorry, I muted myself because it's cold in my shed and I need pudding.
He's just there with his teeth chattering. But yeah, Phil, you're going to come around for a game sometime soon, right?
Yeah, hopefully, although I've got to talk to you about that.
Oh. Why, is it off the menu? You're not coming around this weekend?
Yeah, no, I agreed ages ago for someone to, mate mine, to come up to Oxford, and it's this weekend, apparently.
Blimey, how these things occur.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's like Joe with a doubles tournament.
It's always doubles tournaments. I don't understand why.
Well, because you're a flake, an unreliable flake.
I never bailed on Phil for a doubles tournament.
Well, exactly. This is the thing. I feel like it's because you feel like, for some reason, you can get away with hurting me.
And Richard. It's not just...
oh, yeah, he did it to Rich as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
But why is it, Joe? What is it about me that makes you not care?
I fear that we will go too far and we'll reach too high and people will just hate us.
Yeah. That never actually feels like much of a cause of a concern for you, though.
What?
Well, like the idea of winning. I mean, if that's your excuse, I can't believe for a moment that's exactly accurate.
No. I'm just terrible at making excuses. That's the problem.
Oh, is that what it is?
I have 10 minutes to go write one down, and then...
So what we're taking away from this is that if it comes to having to come up with a reason for not doing something without any kind of forward planning, it's just all sort of falls over, right?
Yeah.
The joke is, I'm on their Facebook page right now, and you know what it says on their Facebook page, Joe?
What's that?
It says there's 24 people going, right? Do you want to know who one of those people is?
Is it me?
Yeah, it's you, Joe. You're there. It says you're going, but I know that's lies. I can't believe it. On my birthday, of all things, as well.
Well, we're arranging to have another birthday event at Triple Helix War Games. We've now got gaming tables. Come and play.
Well, it's true. We are going to go there instead, but we're only doing that because, you flaked out. Are you sure you can't be available on November the 17th, Sunday? What are you actually doing on Sunday, November the 17th, Joe?
I'm in North Wales.
Oh, God, North Wales. What do you want to be in North Wales for?
It wasn't decided by me.
Oh, fine. Not that I dislike North Wales. Actually, North Wales has got some lovely stuff in it, but, for the most part, it's not as cool as a wonderful Warhammer 40,000 tournament, right?
Nothing's more exciting than a wonderful Warhammer 40k tournament.
That's fine. Phil, you going to join me instead? We're going to go November the 17th?
Let me check my diary. But
he's making it. Don't trust him.
Well, exactly. The good news is, though, you see, is that we can continue our undefeated streak, Phil, if that's the case. We can do our Blood Angels Creed combo and keep the good times rolling.
True. I sort of promised I would be doing Underworlds with a bunch of people on 17th.
Well, right then. So basically, no one can go to the doubles tournament with me.
But you can come up here and play some Beast Grave.
I don't play Beast Grave. That stuff. That's ridiculous. Alright, fine. Well, I guess I have to surrender my ticket. That's what we've determined from this conversation. Sad times all round. Much like the conclusion of this podcast. Not that it's been a sad time up to this point, but obviously saying goodbye is always a hard thing to do. But we hope you've enjoyed episode 33 of the Lookout Soap 40k podcast. We've enjoyed producing it, or at least I have. I don't know necessarily if it actually ticked all the boxes for everyone else. I mean, Phil, what do you reckon? You good with this one? How does this rate? How many Phils out of 10 would you give it?
Oh, I mean, let's say 10 out of 10, even though we all know it was like a 6 out of 10.
There you go. That's a 6. This is a solid 6 Phil episode. That's what we're going for. Joe, how many? I don't know. It's an episode that if you're specifically into Warhammer World Events and also going to tournaments, then this is a 10 out of 10 episode. There you go.
If neither of those things are for you, and you don't like listening to them, then it's going to be a lot lower.
Exactly. So there we go. That's the 6 Phils rating.
It's a niche episode for sure.
Well, absolutely.
It's put the speech in at the end, Phil, and not at the beginning, because we had a lot of dropouts.
Well, there you go. What do you reckon, Joe? How many Joes out of 10 would you give this one?
I'll give it 1, because 1 is all you need.
Well, I suppose so. There you go. Check you out. Dodging the question. I reckon that was about a 5 Dans for me. 5 Dan. You know.
Like judo. Like judo.
Like judo, yeah. Very much down the middle. I wasn't a fan of the intro, and this outro has been an absolute bloody mess. But other than that, I think throughout, I think it was quite good, actually, all things other considered. But as Phil said, quite niche for what it was. But we don't always talk about this stuff. But then, to be fair, not nearly anyone gets to the end of these things, so me explaining this to you now is somewhat irrelevant, so I'm not going to bother doing it. All I'm going to do is say goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.